Hey there, story lovers. This is The Fiction Wizard, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if McGonagall performed a medical scan at age 5 and found 19 Horcruxes hidden across Harry's body by Dumbledore? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1. The scan. The letter had been sitting on Minerva McGonagall's desk for 3 days before she finally did something about it. It wasn't an official letter. No ministry seal, no Hogwarts crest. Just a folded piece of parchment that Arabella Figg had pressed into her hand during a chance encounter in Diagon Alley, the old squib's fingers trembling slightly as she'd muttered, "I don't think he's all right, Professor. I don't think he's all right at all," before hurrying away into the crowd like she'd already said too much. The letter inside was short. The boy doesn't play outside. When he does, there are bruises. He flinches when adults raise their voices. The cousin hits him and nobody stops it. I leave food sometimes. I don't know if he gets it. Minerva had read it twice, put it down, and gone to find Dumbledore. Dumbledore had smiled. That particular smile of his, warm and distant at once, like sunlight through frosted glass, and told her that Harry was perfectly safe, that the blood wards around the Dursley home were among the most powerful protective magic in the world, that childhood was not without its difficulties and that difficulty built character, and that he trusted Arabella implicitly but that Arabella was, perhaps, a worrier. Minerva had gone back to her desk. She'd read the letter a third time. Then she'd put on her traveling cloak. She didn't tell Dumbledore she was going. That, in itself, was new. In 30 years of working alongside Albus Dumbledore, she had never done anything significant without at minimum informing him. The omission sat in her chest like a cold stone as she apparat to the end of Privet Drive on a grey Tuesday morning in late July, and she examined the feeling carefully as she walked, and decided she didn't regret it. Number 4 looked like every other house on the street. That was the point of Privet Drive. Everything looked like everything else. The same brick faces and the same neat hedges and the same cars in the same driveways, a neighborhood that had made a collective agreement to be relentlessly, aggressively ordinary. Minerva had stood on this street once before, 4 years ago, and watched Dumbledore place a bundle of blankets on a doorstep, and she had objected, she reminded herself. She had said it was wrong. She had said it. He had smiled and said the blood wards would hold. She knocked on the door. The woman who answered had her brother's eyes and absolutely none of his warmth. Petunia Dursley was long-necked and sharp-featured and she looked at Minerva's traveling cloak with the particular expression of someone who has encountered something distasteful on the bottom of their shoe. "Mrs. Dursley," Minerva said. "My name is Minerva McGonagall. I'm here to see Harry." Petunia's expression cycled through several things very quickly, alarm, calculation, and then a kind of rigid, practiced composure. "He's not available." That wasn't a request. Minerva's voice was pleasant. Her eyes were not. "I'm here on behalf of his guardianship arrangements and I'd like very much to come in. We can do this quietly and efficiently, or I can return with representatives from the appropriate ministry office. Your choice, Mrs. Dursley, but I'd recommend the first option if you'd like your neighbors to remain unaware of the matter." It was a bluff, mostly. But Petunia stepped back from the door. The inside of number 4 was immaculate in that specific anxious way that meant someone cleaned compulsively rather than comfortably. There was a large, doughy boy sitting in front of the television who didn't look up. Family photos lined the walls, the Dursleys at the beach, the Dursleys at Christmas, the Dursleys arranged around an enormous birthday cake. Minerva scanned every photo in the hallway as she followed Petunia through to the kitchen and counted. Not a single image contained Harry Potter. "Where is he?" she asked. "The cupboard," Petunia said, and then seemed to hear herself say it and added, quickly, "He likes it in there." He chose. "Which cupboard?" Petunia pointed at the door beneath the stairs. Minerva crossed the kitchen in 6 steps, and the stone in her chest got heavier with each one. She crouched in front of the small door. It had a latch on the outside, she noted, a latch and a bolt and a padlock that was currently unfastened, and knocked twice, gently. Silence. Then a small shuffling sound. "Harry," she said. "My name is Professor McGonagall. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." More silence. Then, very quietly, "Are you one of Aunt Petunia's friends?" The hope packed into those 6 words, the slight upward note at the end, the careful uncertainty of a child who had learned not to expect much but couldn't quite stop hoping, hit Minerva somewhere behind the sternum like a physical blow. "No," she said. "I'm not. I knew your mum and dad." The latch moved. The door opened 3 inches and one eye looked out at her, very green, very bright, slightly obscured by enormous glasses that were held together at the bridge with a piece of sellotape. She had Lily's eyes, Minerva thought. The color exactly. James's hair, Lily's eyes. "You knew them?" Harry said. "I taught them both. They were 2 of the finest students I ever had." She paused. "Can I come in? Or would you like to come out? Either works for me." The door opened the rest of the way. Harry Potter was small for 5, noticeably small, the kind of small that came from not quite enough food over not quite enough years. He was wearing a t-shirt that could have fit his cousin twice over and a pair of shorts with a drawstring pulled tight to keep them up, and he had a book open on the narrow little mattress behind him. Not a children's book. It was a library book about the solar system, dense with diagrams and numbers, and several pages were dog-eared. He looked at Minerva with those green eyes and the specific, watchful seriousness of a child who has had to learn very young to assess whether an adult is safe. Then he stuck out his hand. "Hello, Professor." She shook it gravely. "Hello, Harry." He smiled at that, a quick, slightly surprised smile, like being treated with courtesy was novel enough to catch him off guard. She sat on the floor outside the cupboard door. He sat in the doorway. Behind her, she could hear Petunia hovering in the kitchen, and she ignored her entirely. "I was wondering," Minerva said, keeping her voice conversational, "whether you'd let me do something. It's a kind of checkup. Like a doctor's visit, except instead of a doctor it's a witch, and instead of poking and prodding it's a small amount of magic. It doesn't hurt at all." Harry looked at her carefully. "What does it check for?" "How you're doing. Physically, magically. Whether everything is as it should be." She paused. "Is that all right with you? Does Aunt Petunia have to say yes?" "No. It's your body. You say yes or no." Something shifted in his expression, a kind of quiet recognition, like she'd said something that meant more to him than she'd realized it would. "Okay," he said. "Yes." Minerva drew her wand. The diagnostic charm she used was one Poppy Pomfrey had taught her years ago for exactly these kinds of welfare situations. It was thorough, non-invasive, and produced a full reading in a soft golden script that would hang in the air for her to read. She'd used it 3 times before, each time for a child she'd had concerns about, and each time it had shown her the expected results, malnutrition markers, in 2 cases, and in 1 case a broken wrist that had been set badly without magic. She cast it. The golden script appeared. She read it. And the world dropped out from under her. The first lines were what she'd expected: low iron, low weight percentile, a healed fracture in 2 ribs that had not received proper treatment. She read those lines with a cold, quiet fury. Then she read the next section, the magical diagnostic, and the fury went somewhere else entirely because what she was reading did not make sense, could not make sense, and she read it again twice to be certain her eyes weren't failing her. Horcrux fragments. 19 of them. Not floating freely in the magical field, woven in. Integrated. The diagnostic was flagging them throughout his body like a map of deliberately placed landmines, 3 in his core, the seat of magical power, 4 distributed across his nervous system, 2 in proximity to his heart, the rest distributed through his blood, his bone, the deepest architecture of his magical signature. The script kept scrolling. It was still producing findings. Minerva's wand hand had dropped and she was kneeling on the Dursley hallway floor reading golden letters in the air with her mouth slightly open and her mind doing something she didn't have a word for, not quite panic, not quite horror, some third thing that was colder and more absolute than either. Dark magic anchoring. Intentional binding structures. Soul fragment integration, 19 separate instances. The diagnostic was struggling to categorize some of the binding work. It was very old magic. It was very careful magic. It had not happened in one event. This had been built. Professor? She looked down. Harry was watching her face and he had very clearly seen something alarming in her expression because he was wearing the carefully contained worry of a child who was used to monitoring adult reactions to see which direction danger would come from. "I'm fine," she said, automatically. Then, because it was a stupid lie and he was clearly sharp enough to see through it, "I've found some things I want to look at more carefully. Nothing that's going to hurt you today. I'd just like to, may I visit with you for a little while? And I'd like to bring a friend who knows more about this kind of magic than I do. Would that be all right? Is it bad?" Harry asked. He wasn't frightened. He was asking for information. "It's something we're going to fix," Minerva said, which was the truest answer she had. He considered this with the focused deliberateness of a child used to weighing limited information. Then he nodded. "All right. You can come back. But you have to tell me what you find. Not pretend it's fine when it isn't." Minerva looked at him for a moment. 5 years old. Sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs with a book about the solar system and the collected wariness of someone much older. "I promise," she said. "Every word." She stood, smoothed her cloak, and walked back to the kitchen where Petunia was standing very still near the kettle with the expression of someone who would very much like this whole situation to stop existing. Minerva stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her, and Petunia seemed to feel the weight of that look because she didn't say anything, which was probably the intelligent choice. "I'll be back this afternoon," Minerva said. "Pack his things. He's coming with me." "You can't, I can." "I am." Minerva's voice was the same level tone she used when she had 7 seconds of patience left and was choosing to use them wisely. "If you'd like to dispute that, you're welcome to contact the people who arranged this placement and have that conversation. I imagine it will be illuminating for everyone involved." A beat. "Have his things ready." She left before Petunia could organize her face into a response. Outside on the pavement, she walked back to the end of the street, and she stood very still for a moment in the gray morning air, and she let herself feel the full weight of what the diagnostic had told her. Because she needed to feel it before she could act on it, and she needed to act on it before she could let herself feel it properly, and the window between the two was very small. 19 Horcruxes. Placed there. Built there. Only one person had ever had the access. Only one person had ever had the knowledge. Only one person had known exactly what Harry was from the moment of his parents' death and had made every decision about what happened to him since. Albus Dumbledore. She took one breath. Then another. Then she apparat to St. Mungo's and asked for Poppy Pomfrey. Poppy had been the Hogwarts matron for 22 years and in that time she had seen things that would have made civilian healers require a strong lie-down. Dragon pox complications, Quidditch injuries of frankly architectural complexity, one incident involving a 6th year and a switching spell that she still occasionally woke from at 3 in the morning. She was not easily shaken. She was shaken now. She had done her own scan, a more comprehensive version, a full-spectrum healer's diagnostic that took 11 minutes and produced documentation 3 feet long, and she had read it in complete silence, rolling it slowly between her hands, and then she had rolled it back up and sat very still in the private consultation room at St. Mungo's that Minerva had requisitioned with a curt word to the receptionist, and she said, "Minerva." "I know," Minerva said. This isn't Voldemort's work. The binding architecture on these," Poppy stopped. Looked at the documentation again. Looked at Minerva. The binding architecture is not Dark Lord spontaneous. This is deliberate. This is designed. I know. Who would? She stopped again. The silence did the work of the rest of the sentence. I need you to tell me, Minerva said carefully, in your professional opinion, can they be removed? Poppy's eyes moved to Harry, who was sitting on the examination table in his enormous t-shirt, feet dangling, watching them both with those disconcertingly sharp green eyes. She had explained to him, very carefully, that she was doing a more detailed check of what Professor McGonagall had found. He had held still for the entire 11 minutes without fidgeting, which was remarkable in a 5-year-old, and had asked 2 very precise questions about what certain instruments did that Poppy had answered honestly because she had the uncomfortable feeling he would know if she was being vague. Theoretically, Poppy said carefully, choosing each word like she was stepping on ice. In theory, a fragment that has been integrated over time, rather than violently embedded, as in the original Horcrux creation, could be extracted without destroying the host. The integration method here is actually, she pressed her mouth together. It's actually very skilled work. In a horrible way. The fragments are placed to avoid fatal disruption. They were placed by someone who did not want the host to die. They wanted him alive, Minerva said. Flat. For later. Poppy made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Can it be done, Minerva said, without hurting him? It would be intense. Magically. Physically. Poppy looked at Harry again, and this time Harry met her gaze with an open, waiting expression. For a child his age, some of the extractions would be, it wouldn't be painless. I'd rather know what it actually feels like than have you protect me from knowing, Harry said. He wasn't rude about it. He was just direct. The voice of someone who had learned that the truth, however hard, was better than the version people told you to make themselves feel better about telling it. Poppy blinked. In 22 years, she had never been preempted by a 5-year-old patient. Some of the extractions, she said, after a moment, will feel like a very intense magical pressure from the inside. Some will be more like, she searched for an analogy, like a thorn being removed. Quick but sharp. But none of them will actually damage me. If done correctly, Poppy said, no. Your core will actually be significantly more powerful without them. The Horcrux fragments act as, I'm simplifying, they act as noise in the magical signal. Like static on a radio. Remove the static, and the signal itself gets cleaner. Stronger. Harry considered this. Right, he said. Then let's do it. We can't do it today, Minerva said. We need, I know, Harry said patiently. I wasn't saying today. I was saying in general. We're doing it. He paused. That is what we're doing, isn't it? We're not just going to write reports about it. Minerva looked at him. The late afternoon light through the consultation room window caught his glasses and turned them briefly opaque, and then he tilted his head slightly and she could see his eyes again, Lily's eyes, Lily's directness, that particular brand of courage that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. No, she said quietly. We are absolutely not just going to write reports about it. Harry nodded like this was the answer he expected. Then he looked at the documentation in Poppy's hands. Can I see that? Poppy looked at Minerva. Minerva looked at Harry. Yes, Minerva said. You can see it. But Poppy is going to explain what all of it means, because the notation is specialized. That's fine. He held out his hand. Poppy gave him the document with the expression of someone who had stopped understanding what was happening to their Tuesday but had decided to go with it. Harry unrolled it carefully and began to read from the top. He moved his lips slightly on some of the longer terms. When he reached the section cataloging the Horcrux locations, he went still for a moment, and Minerva watched his face and saw the thing happen that she'd been afraid of, the moment where it became real rather than abstract, were the clinical notation connected to the actual fact of what it described, which was that someone had done this to him on purpose and had done it when he was very small and there had been nothing he could do to stop it. His expression didn't crumble. It went quiet in a particular way. A 5-year-old face wearing something much older than 5. "Someone put these here," he said. Not a question. "Yes," Minerva said. "Who?" The pause that followed was a fraction too long. "We're establishing that with certainty before," Minerva began. Harry looked up from the document and met her eyes. "You already know," he said. "You've already worked it out. You're deciding whether to tell me." Another silence. Longer this time. Minerva sat down across from him on the second examination chair, so they were eye level, which required her to fold herself at an undignified angle on a seat designed for standing height, and she held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "I have a very strong idea. I'm not telling you the name today, not because I'm protecting you from it, but because I want to be certain before I say it to you. What I can tell you is this: it was someone in a position of trust. Someone who made decisions about your life. And those decisions," she stopped, found the right words, tried again. "Those decisions were made to serve a larger purpose that had nothing to do with what was good for you." Harry processed this with that focused stillness he seemed to carry as a default state. "So they used me," he said. "They tried to," Minerva said. Past tense. "They tried to." He looked back at the document. Kept reading. His thumb traced one of the diagnostic lines, the one that mapped the 3 fragments in his magical core, and he said, almost to himself, "Static on the radio." "Exactly that," Poppy said gently. He rolled the document back up and held it out to her. "Thank you for explaining it," he said, and his manners were automatic, worn smooth with practice, the manners of a child who had learned to be polite to adults because politeness was a kind of shield. Poppy took it without speaking. She was doing the thing, Minerva noticed, that Poppy did when she was not going to cry in front of a patient: the precise, careful movements, the focused attention to small details, the pressing together of lips. "I'd like to come back with you," Harry said to Minerva. "Not to the Dursleys. Somewhere else." "With you?" "Yes," Minerva said. "That's the plan." He nodded. "Do you have a lot of books?" Despite everything, Minerva felt something shift in her expression that was almost, a smile. "An embarrassing number," she said. "Including several about the solar system." "Can I read them?" "Every one." He slid off the examination table. He was wearing one sock and one bare foot, she noticed. She had no idea where the second sock had gone during the examination, and it didn't seem worth asking, and he stood there with his enormous t-shirt hanging to his knees and Lily Evans's eyes bright behind the sellotaped glasses, and he said, "All right. What happens next?" What happened next was 4 hours and 2 return trips to Privet Drive, one to collect a backpack that contained 3 library books, a broken toy soldier, a notebook filled with small careful drawings of planets and animals, and one very detailed sketch of a bicycle, and a second, worn stuffed dog missing one eye, and one extremely uncomfortable conversation with Petunia Dursley that ended with Petunia saying things that Minerva would not repeat and Minerva saying things that were quiet enough that the neighbors couldn't hear, but landed with sufficient weight that Petunia went pale and signed the papers without further argument. Harry watched the conversation from the doorway of the kitchen with the measuring expression. When Petunia signed the papers, he didn't look relieved. He just picked up his backpack and said, "I didn't say goodbye to Dudley." "Do you want to?" Minerva asked. He considered it seriously for a moment. "No," he said. Then, after a pause, "He's got a really good bike. I would have liked a bike." Minerva filed that away. They left number 4 Privet Drive at 6:30 in the evening. Harry walked out the front door without looking back. He did, briefly, tilt his head up to look at the sky, overcast, the gray streaked with the early bronze of a fading July evening, with an expression that might have been relief and might have been something harder to name. Minerva rested her hand briefly on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. But he also leaned very slightly into the contact, almost without seeming to be aware he was doing it, and she felt that small unconscious lean like a splinter in her chest. She took him to her quarters at Hogwarts. The school was empty in late July, the portrait sleeping and the corridors cool and quiet, and she set up the guest room and made tea and produced, from somewhere in the back of her cupboard, a very good shortbread biscuit, and they sat at her kitchen table and she told him the things she'd promised to tell him. Not everything. She didn't have everything yet. But the shape of it, that he had been placed somewhere unsafe deliberately, that the magic in him had been interfered with deliberately, that this was all connected to who he was and what had happened to his parents and what certain powerful people had decided to do with that. He listened without interrupting. He drank his tea and ate 3 shortbread biscuits and looked at the table between them and listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So Voldemort killed my parents trying to kill me, and then the person who decided where I'd live put 19 pieces of, what, soul pieces in me so that eventually I could be used to finish killing Voldemort. That's the shape of it." Yes. He looked at her. That's terrible planning. Minerva blinked. I'm sorry. 19, Harry said. If you're trying to kill something and you need 19 separate things to do it, something has gone very wrong with your original plan. He picked up another biscuit. Also, if your plan for killing something involves using a child as a weapon, you're a bad person. Yes, Minerva said. That is an accurate assessment. So we're going to take the 19 things out of me and then figure out a different plan. Yes. And the person who put them there. We're going to deal with that, Minerva said carefully. Harry looked at her with those bright, steady eyes. You're not going to tell me not to be angry about it? I would never, Minerva said. You have every right to be whatever you are about it. He ate the biscuit. Looked at the table again. When he looked back up, his expression had done the shift again, that complicated 5-year-old face doing something older, working through something that needed working through. My mum and dad, he said. Did they know? Was this their plan too? No, Minerva said, and she was completely certain of this, and the certainty was the best thing she could give him. Absolutely not. Your parents would have, your mother especially, would have. She stopped, because her voice was in danger of doing something undignified. She found it again. Your mother was one of the most brilliant people I have ever taught. And the most protective. She would have burned the world down first. Harry seemed to sit slightly straighter at that. Not much. Just slightly. What was she like? And so Minerva told him about Lily Evans, the bright, fierce girl from a Muggle family who had walked into the wizarding world with nothing and mastered it through sheer ferocious intelligence, who had laughed loudly and argued loudly and loved loudly and walked into a Dark Lord's path without blinking because she put herself between that Dark Lord and her son. She told him about James, too, the reckless brilliance and the loyalty that ran bone deep and the way he'd grown from an insufferable teenager into someone Minerva had genuinely respected. Harry listened with his chin propped in one hand and his tea cooling in the other and an expression that was hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food. It was past 9 when he finally said, I'm tired, with the clear-eyed practicality of a child who monitors his own states because nobody else has done it. He said goodnight with those careful automatic manners. He took his backpack. He went to the guest room. He'd been in there for about 10 minutes when Minerva, sitting at the table with cold tea and the weight of everything that had happened in the last 12 hours pressing on her shoulders like physical mass, heard a small sound from the direction of the guest room. She went to the door and listened. He was reading aloud to himself. Barely a whisper, one of her books, the star charts, she thought, something about the distance between planets, his small voice carrying the numbers carefully through the dark. She stood there for a moment. She did not cry. Minerva McGonagall had not cried in a very long time and she was not going to start in a corridor at 9:15 on a Tuesday. She went back to the kitchen, picked up her wand, and wrote 3 messages, one to Amelia Bones at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, one to Pomfrey, and one to a solicitor she trusted who specialized in magical guardianship and who had a particular talent for being difficult with bureaucracies. She sent them all into the dark with a clear conscience. Then she wrote a 4th message and held it for a long moment, considering. It was addressed to Azkaban prison. "I need to know the current status of Sirius Black's case," she wrote. "I believe there are questions about the original conviction that were never properly examined. I am prepared to argue this formally. Please respond to the above with the name of whoever I need to speak to." She signed it with her full name and title. Let the weight of 30 years of unimpeachable reputation carry it. She sent it. Then she sat in the quiet kitchen of her quiet quarters in the quiet school, and she let herself, very briefly, feel the full horror of what the diagnostic had shown her, and the full fury of what it meant, and the full grief of where Harry Potter had been sleeping for 4 years in the house with the locked cupboard and the photographs with no room in them. She felt all of it, precisely and completely, like lancing a wound. Then she put it somewhere she could access when she needed it and picked up her wand and started making plans. Because there were 19 Horcruxes in that boy and someone had put them there and the someone's name was Albus Dumbledore and Minerva McGonagall had a very great deal to do. She worked through the night. Harry woke at 6, which she could tell because she heard his door and then his careful footsteps in the corridor, and then a pause outside the kitchen, and then he appeared in the doorway with his stuffed dog under one arm and his notebook in the other hand. "You didn't sleep," he said, looking at her. "I don't need much sleep," she said. "Neither do I," he said. He looked at the papers spread across the table, carefully worded, nothing a child needed to see, and decided not to ask about them, which was a sophisticated piece of social reading for anyone and remarkable in a 5-year-old. "Can I have breakfast?" "I'll make it." "I can make it," he said, with the mild firmness of someone who has been making their own meals for a while and is not certain offering is the same as taking over. "I know how to do eggs." Minerva looked at him. He looked back. "Then we can both make eggs," she said. "And you can tell me more about the solar system." His expression did the thing again, that quick, slightly surprised flash of warmth, like being met with something he'd been hoping for but hadn't expected to find. "Mercury," he said, going to the cooker with the confidence of someone who has long since figured out how things work in an unfamiliar kitchen. "Smallest planet. Closest to the sun. Takes 88 days to orbit but almost 60 Earth days to rotate, which means its year is shorter than its day, which doesn't make any sense but it's true." "Is it?" Minerva said. "It is," he said, cracking an egg with neat, practiced economy. "Also it has almost no atmosphere so the temperature swings are enormous. During the day it's 400 degrees and at night it's -180. Same planet." He paused. "Kind of like living here," he added, perfectly offhand. "Hot and cold depending on who was in what mood." Minerva watched him carefully crack a second egg and decided not to say anything yet. There would be time for that. There would be many long conversations ahead about many things, and Harry, she was already beginning to understand, would have them when he was ready and not before. "Venus is next," he said, "and it's actually the hottest even though it's further away, because of the atmosphere, which is mostly carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid which is, genuinely hostile," Minerva said. "Right." He looked up at her with a small, quick grin. "Genuinely hostile. They made eggs." He told her about the solar system. Outside the Hogwarts windows, the Scottish morning came in cool and bright, and the empty castle made its old stone sounds, and somewhere in the post, 3 letters were making their way toward Amelia Bones and Pomfrey and a solicitor who was very good at being difficult with bureaucracies. And somewhere in Azkaban, Sirius Black was sitting in a cell dreaming the dream he always dreamed, the green flash, the ruins, the baby crying, the sound of Peter Pettigrew laughing, and he did not yet know that something in the world had shifted. But it had. Chapter 2, What was done? Amelia Bones arrived at Hogwarts at 8:30 in the morning, and she came alone, which told Minerva everything she needed to know about Amelia's instincts. She was a square-jawed, no-nonsense woman who wore her monocle like a challenge and had run the Department of Magical Law Enforcement for 3 years with the kind of methodical, unsentimental precision that made corrupt people deeply uncomfortable. She and Minerva had known each other since school, not close friends, but the kind of old acquaintance where 25 years of mutual respect substituted for warmth, and when Minerva had written urgent, private, do not mention to anyone including the minister, Amelia had come alone. She sat down at Minerva's kitchen table, accepted tea, looked at the documentation Poppy had prepared, and read it from top to bottom without speaking. Harry was in the guest room. Minerva had given him 4 books from her shelf, 2 on astronomy, 1 on the history of magical Britain that she judged appropriately edited for a 5-year-old, and 1 on magical theory written for beginners that she'd had a feeling about, and he'd taken all 4 with the focus of someone who had just discovered a supply of something they'd been starving for. Amelia finished the documentation and put it down. "The binding architecture," she said. "Yes," Minerva said. "Poppy's notation here." Amelia tapped the 3rd page. "She's describing the binding as structured. Designed. Not incidental contact. No. Not incidental. Minerva." Amelia looked up. Her monocle caught the morning light. "If I follow this to its logical conclusion, then you're in the same place I am," Minerva said. "Yes." Amelia was quiet for a long moment. She picked up her tea and put it down without drinking it. "You understand what you're saying? If you're saying what I think you're saying." "Amelia. I've been saying it to myself all night. I am completely certain. Certainty is one thing. Evidence that will hold in a Wisengamot proceeding is another. I have the diagnostic. I have Poppy's full healer's report. I have the binding analysis, which Poppy cross-referenced with 3 independent sources on Horcrux construction methodology. And I have," Minerva paused. "I have the fact that only one person had both the knowledge and the access. Who else? Who else in Britain has that specific intersection of ancient magic, institutional power, and 4 years of unsupervised access to that child?" Amelia looked at the table. Something moved across her face that was not quite the carefully maintained professional composure she'd worn since she sat down, something older and more troubled than that. "You're talking about Albus Dumbledore," she said. "Yes," Minerva said. "I am." The kitchen was very quiet. From down the corridor, faintly, they could both hear the occasional turn of a page. "He'll deny it," Amelia said. "Of course he will. And he has allies in every office in the ministry and on 2/3 of the Wisengamot benches and the ear of the current minister for magic." She picked up her tea again. This time she drank it. "You understand what you're walking into?" "I understand very clearly what I'm walking into," Minerva said. "I also understand what that child has been walking in for 4 years without anyone doing a single thing about it." "So?" Amelia looked at her for a long moment. Then she set down her cup, straightened her robes, and said, "I need a copy of this documentation. I need the original diagnostic wand-recorded testimony from both you and Poppy. I need the child to remain in a secure location that Dumbledore does not control." A pause. "And I need time, Minerva. I can't move on this in a week." "The kind of case you're describing, how long? To build it properly?" 6 months minimum. You have 3. Amelia raised an eyebrow. "That is not how legal timelines work." "Harry has 19 Horcrux fragments in his body," Minerva said, with the calm, clear voice of someone who has thought this through from every angle. "Every day those fragments remain, his magical development is being suppressed and distorted. Poppy believes he should begin extractions within the month. The moment extractions begin, certain interested parties will notice. We cannot afford 6 months." Amelia picked up the documentation again and read the 3rd page. Read it twice. Put it down. 3 months, she said. And I am not promising a Wiesengemot hearing at the end of it. I'm promising a formal investigation opened under my authority, which gives me legal grounds to freeze certain guardianship arrangements and certain institutional powers pending findings. That's enough to start, Minerva said. That's what I need. They looked at each other across the table, two women in their 50s who had spent their entire professional lives working within a system they both knew was imperfect, arriving, simultaneously, at the point where the system's imperfection had become something they could not continue to accommodate. Sirius Black, Minerva said, before Amelia could leave. Amelia's expression shifted to something careful. What about him? He never had a trial. That's not, Amelia stopped. Frowned. The frown deepened. He was remanded to Azkaban under wartime emergency provisions. There was, she stopped again. The frown was very deep now. The trial documentation. I would be very interested, Minerva said evenly, to know where the trial documentation is. Amelia stood very still in the way of someone who has just discovered they are standing on different ground than they thought. I will look into that, she said, in a voice that was extremely precise. Personally. She left. Minerva listened to her footsteps down the main corridor and then the distant crack of apparition. She sat for a moment. Then she went down the corridor and knocked on the guest room door. Come in, Harry said. He was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the bed with all 4 books open around him in a loose circle, moving between them with the focused, methodical pleasure of someone conducting a private research project. The astronomy books were open to facing pages. The magical theory book had several pages marked with torn strips of the notebook paper he'd pulled from his bag. The history book was open at a full-page illustration of the founding of Hogwarts, which he was examining with his face very close to the page. He looked up. Is Amelia Bones a real person or a joke? He said. Minerva blinked. I beg your pardon. That's her actual name? Amelia Bones? He looked entirely serious about this question. It sounds like a pirate. It is her actual name, Minerva said, and sat in the chair by the window. She is the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and one of the most capable people in the Ministry. Harry accepted this. She was reading documents. He gestured vaguely toward the wall, which was in the direction of the kitchen. You weren't talking about good things. No. We weren't. About me? About the situation. Which involves you. He nodded and looked at the magical theory book. This says that a suppressed magical core produces instability, he said, pointing to a passage he'd marked. Like the magic backs up. It says children with suppressed cores often have accidental magic events that are larger and less controlled than they'd be otherwise, because the pressure builds. Minerva said nothing. Just waited. I've had a lot of those, Harry said. He said it matter-of-factly. I made Dudley's hair fall out once. And I ended up on the school roof. And I accidentally locked myself out of Mrs. Figg's house by making the door handle vanish. He paused. I thought it was because I was bad at controlling it. But it's not that, is it? It's not that, Minerva said. No. It's the Horcruxes interfering. So when they're gone, will it be, he seemed to be looking for the right word. More mine? The simplicity of the question was devastating. Minerva held it carefully. Yes, she said. That's exactly what it will be. More yours. He looked at the book for a moment longer. Then he said, Can I tell you something that happened? Yes. Last year, I was 4, I think maybe 4.5, I got really angry one night. Properly angry. And the light bulb in the cupboard exploded and then, he paused. Then the lights in the whole house went out. All of them. And then the lights in the 2 houses next door. He glanced at her. And I didn't know how big it had gotten, so I just stayed very still until it stopped. But it took a while to stop. How long? Minerva asked. I think about an hour. Maybe longer. He went back to examining the book. I was worried I'd done something permanently wrong. To electricity. I wasn't sure how it worked. Minerva thought about a 4-year-old child alone in a dark cupboard while the power failed in 3 houses and trying very carefully to stay still so he didn't make it worse, and she applied every ounce of professional composure she had to her expression. You didn't do anything permanently wrong, she said. I know, he said. The lights came back. He turned a page. This book says accidental magic in children usually scales with emotional intensity. So a really big one probably meant I was really upset. Probably, Minerva said carefully. He nodded. Turned another page. Then, without looking up, Dudley got a new bike that day. I asked if I could have a go on it and he sat on me. Minerva looked at the window. The Scottish morning was very bright. The grounds below were green and empty and the loch was flat and silver. Harry, she said, when she trusted her voice. I want you to know that none of this is because of anything you did or didn't do. The Horcruxes. The cupboard. None of it. He looked up. He had the expression of someone who has heard a version of this before, probably from Arabella Figg, from the occasional teacher who noticed something, from whatever dim awareness he had of his own situation, and who processes it each time as both new and already half-known. I know, he said. But thank you for saying it like it's definitely true. She looked at him and felt something settle in her chest that she recognized as a decision being made without her noticing she'd made it. She'd spent the night drafting careful legal arguments and building methodical cases and thinking about strategy, and all of that was necessary and she would continue doing all of it, but underneath all the strategy was this: she was not going to let this child navigate what was coming alone. She was 5 years old when she'd decided to be a teacher, she remembered suddenly. The same age Harry was now. She had looked at her own teacher and thought, I want to do that, and then she'd done it for 50 years with the focused, bone-deep commitment of someone who had always known exactly what they were for. Harry Potter needed someone who knew what they were for. Right, she said. Let me tell you what comes next. Poppy arrived at noon with her full medical kit and a shorter version of the diagnostic so she could track any changes from the previous day's scan. Harry submitted to it with the same still patience, and Poppy read the results, noted several things in her records, and then sat across from Harry at the kitchen table with the careful seriousness she reserved for patients who deserved honesty. I want to explain the removal process, she said. So you understand it before we discuss timing. Good, Harry said. He'd brought the magical theory book to the table and had it open next to his lunch. There are 19 fragments, Poppy said. They're not all equal in how deeply they're embedded. Some of them, 3, specifically, are in your magical core, and those will take the most work. They've been there since you were roughly 14 months old, and they've had nearly 4 years to integrate. She glanced at Minerva, then back to Harry. I want to be honest with you that the core extractions will be difficult. Difficult like nothing you've experienced before, Poppy said directly. It won't cause permanent harm. But it will be intense. I want you to know that going in, rather than be surprised by it. Harry looked at her steadily. Will I be conscious for it? Ideally, yes. The extraction process responds better to a cooperative magical field than a sedated one. I know that's not the most comfortable answer. It's fine, Harry said. Then, with the mild practical curiosity that seemed to be his default mode for most information, how does it work? Mechanically? What does the extraction actually do? Poppy folded her hands on the table in the manner of someone who has decided this child is going to get the real explanation and they might as well start. A Horcrux fragment anchors itself to its host through a kind of magical resonance. It finds a frequency in the host's magical signature that it can match, and it essentially tunes itself to that frequency. Over time, the fragment and the host's magic become partially harmonized. The extraction process involves deliberately detuning the fragment, introducing a counter-resonance that creates enough dissonance to break the anchor, and then physically drawing the fragment out. And the intensity comes from the detuning process, Harry said. Poppy blinked. Yes. Essentially. Yes. The dissonance is what you feel. Harry thought about this, tracing the edge of his book with one finger. Like pulling a splinter, he said. The friction. Very like that. Yes. And after it's out, the frequency in my core stabilizes to its natural state? Gradually, yes. The core essentially recalibrates. There's often a period of adjustment that can be unpredictable, surges of accidental magic, unusual sensitivity. But it resolves. Harry nodded and looked at the magical theory book. He found the passage he'd marked and read it again. Then he said, the 3 core fragments. Can we do those first? I'd actually recommend starting with the peripheral fragments, Poppy said. Build the process, allow the core to adjust incrementally. If the core fragments are doing the most suppression, Harry said, not challenging, just reasoning it out, then removing those first gives the remaining extractions a cleaner environment to happen in. The core recalibrates, the other fragments lose some of their anchor stability. Doesn't that make the peripheral ones easier to remove afterward? Poppy sat back in her chair. Minerva pressed her lips together in what was not quite a smile. That is, Poppy said. She looked at Minerva. Then back at Harry. That is actually a reasonable clinical argument. I'd want to review the literature. I've been thinking about it since this morning, Harry said. He slid the magical theory book toward Poppy and pointed at the passage. It says here that core stability affects peripheral resonance in developing magical children. So if the core fragments are destabilizing the whole system, fixing the center should help the outside. Poppy looked at the passage. Read it. Looked at Harry. He was eating his sandwich with unperturbed focus, waiting for her assessment. You've been reading for 4 hours, she said. Good books, he said. Poppy closed her mouth. Opened it. Closed it again. Then she said, I'll consult with a colleague in the Department of Magical Maladies about sequencing. But she gathered herself. You've identified a genuine theoretical point. Harry nodded and took another bite of his sandwich. He seemed neither surprised nor particularly pleased by this, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who has tested a hypothesis and found it solid. The afternoon brought rain and Phileas Flitwick. He arrived at 3 looking slightly windswept and very curious, because Minerva had written him a note that said I need your opinion on some very specific magic and I need you to keep this between us, and Phileas, who had known Minerva since 1962 and had never once heard her use the phrase keep this between us, had responded by arriving at absolute maximum speed. He was a tiny man with a squeaky voice and a gentle manner that completely failed to convey the fact that he had been a dueling champion in his youth and was widely considered one of the most technically accomplished charm workers in Britain. He sat down at the table, looked at the documentation Minerva put in front of him, and his eyebrows went up. Harry was doing arithmetic in his notebook at the other end of the table. Minerva had given him a set of increasingly difficult problems from a second-year textbook, less because she was testing him and more because she'd noticed that he seemed to use focused calculation as a way of managing situations that were emotionally complex, and she'd decided to accommodate that. Phileas read the documentation with the particular intensity of an expert encountering a problem in his field, and the further he read, the quieter he got, and the quieter he got, the more alarming his silence became. The binding architecture, he said finally. Yes, Minerva said. This section here, he pointed at Poppy's notation regarding the methodological cross-referencing. Poppy's citing Ollivander on Soulwork and Aldrich of Bohemia on fragment stabilization. He looked up. This isn't standard Horcrux construction. The standard method is violent, imprecise, and immediate. This is careful, Minerva said. This is gorgeous work, Phileas said, with the horrified appreciation of a craftsman confronted with superlative evil. From a purely technical standpoint, the integration methodology is, I've never seen fragment distribution this deliberate. Whoever did this wasn't just trying to store soul fragments. They were designing a specific magical architecture. He leaned closer to the documentation. They wanted the fragments in particular positions relative to each other. Look, they're arranged almost like a lattice. 3 core anchors, 4 neural thread anchors, 2 cardiac resonance anchors, the rest distributed through the blood-bone interface. This is a network. The table was very quiet. Harry had stopped doing arithmetic. A network for what? Minerva said. Phileas turned the documentation sideways and studied it from a different angle. I'd need time to analyze the full geometry of the placement. But my initial instinct is, he paused. It's almost like an amplification structure. The fragments are reinforcing each other as much as they're anchoring. What does Poppy say about the host's magical output? Suppressed, Minerva said. Phileas frowned. That contradicts what the placement structure suggests. A network like this should be, he stopped. Looked at the documentation again. Ah, he said softly. What? Minerva said. It's both, Phileas said. The fragments are suppressing him now, acting as limiters while the architecture is incomplete. But if the network were completed, he looked up and his expression had gone to somewhere Minerva didn't entirely like. Completed with a 20th fragment, perhaps, placed at the center, at the deepest core, the whole structure would invert. The limiters become amplifiers. The network becomes a channel. A channel for what? Harry said from the other end of the table. Phileas looked at him. Seemed to register, fully for the first time, that the documentation described the child currently sitting at the table with him, and his expression did several rapid and uncomfortable things. Power transfer, Phileas said carefully. The structure, if completed, would allow whoever controlled the 20th fragment to draw on the entire magical architecture. Through you. Harry looked at him steadily. So the plan was to put 19 pieces in me and then at some point add a 20th to turn me into a power source. That's a simplification, but, is it wrong? Phileas looked at the documentation. No, he said. It's not wrong. Right. Harry picked up his pencil and went back to the arithmetic. Minerva and Phileas looked at each other across the table. Phileas had the expression of a man who has just met something that has reorganized several of his assumptions about what a 5-year-old is. Can we break the network? Minerva asked quietly. With the right approach, yes. Phileas looked at the documentation again with a renewed focus. But you'd want to remove the core anchors first to destabilize the lattice structure, and then, that's what I said, Harry noted, without looking up. Phileas turned to look at him. You've been reading about magical theory. 4 hours, Harry said. He pointed at the book still sitting at the far end of the table. And it made logical sense given what Poppy explained about core stability and peripheral resonance. Phileas picked up the magical theory book. Looked at the passages Harry had marked. Put it back down with the particular expression of someone recalibrating at speed. I would like, he said carefully, to be involved in the extraction process. You're a charms master, not a healer, Minerva said. And this, he gestured at the documentation, is not a healing problem. The binding architecture is charms work. Advanced charms work. The extraction methodology will need someone who can perform the detuning without disrupting the lattice prematurely and causing a cascade. He looked at Minerva. Poppy is extraordinary at what she does. But this is also what I do. Harry had put down his pencil again. He was watching Phileas with the evaluating expression. You were a dueling champion, Harry said. Phileas looked at him. How did you? It says so in the history book. Harry gestured vaguely at the history of magical Britain. You're listed in the section on 20th century dueling. Filius Flitwick, 1963 European Wizarding Dueling Championship, runner-up 1962. He paused. You came second in 62. My opponent cheated, Filius said, with the immediate precision of someone who has been waiting 40 years to clarify this. What did he do? Disillusionment charm on his wand hand. The judges missed it. Harry considered this with what appeared to be genuine indignation on Filius's behalf. That's terrible. Yes, Filius said. It was terrible. He seemed to feel that this 5-year-old's validation had filled a long-standing void. I won in 63. I know, Harry said. It's in the book. Filius looked at Minerva. Minerva looked at Filius. He can be involved, Harry said, going back to his arithmetic. I'd like the most qualified people on this. Minerva pressed her lips together firmly. Yes. Well. Filius will be involved. Late afternoon brought the reply from Azkaban, and it was not from a case officer or an administrative record keeper. It was from the governor of the prison itself, a short, curt note informing her that the prisoner Black was in poor health but alive, that any inquiries regarding conviction documentation should be directed to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and that visits required 3 weeks advance notice and ministry approval. Minerva wrote back immediately. She told the governor that she was directing her inquiry regarding conviction documentation to the DMLE as instructed, that she was simultaneously requesting an emergency welfare review under the Azkaban Reform Standards of 1978, and that if the 3-week visit notice requirement could not be expedited in a matter of urgent legal consequence, she would be happy to raise the issue with the Parliamentary Oversight Committee for Magical Corrections, whose chair she had taught in 1959 and with whom she maintained a warm correspondence. She received a response in 40 minutes. The visit was approved for Friday. She allowed herself one brief, grim smile. Harry appeared in the doorway as she was filing the correspondence. Who's Sirius Black? He said. Minerva looked at him. He had the notebook under his arm and a pencil behind his ear and the expression of someone who has been thinking about something they have heard and have finally decided to ask about directly. Where did you hear that name? The letter you just got. I wasn't reading over your shoulder, I just caught it when you were writing back. He leaned against the doorframe. Is it in the history book? No, Minerva said. He was, she measured what to say and how much. He was your parents' friend. He was meant to be your godfather, the person who would take care of you if anything happened to your parents. Harry went very still. What do you mean, meant to be? He's in Azkaban, Minerva said. He was put there after your parents died. He was accused of several serious things. She looked at Harry. I am not certain the accusation was fair. I'm going to visit him on Friday. Harry absorbed this. The stillness lasted about 4 seconds. Then he said, I want to come. Azkaban is, I know what Azkaban is. It's the prison with the Dementors. He looked at her steadily. I want to come. He was supposed to be my godfather. If you're going to talk to him about me, I should be there. He's in poor health, Minerva said. Seeing him will what? Harry said. A hint of something sharper, now, not defiance exactly, but the clear-eyed impatience of someone who has just identified a pattern of being protected from information. Will be upsetting? I've already found out I have 19 soul pieces in me that someone put there on purpose. I think I can handle a prison visit. Minerva looked at him. He was right. She knew he was right, and moreover she knew that he knew he was right, and the thing that made it complicated wasn't that he was wrong but that he was 5 years old and she was feeling, for the first time, the specific complicated tug of wanting to protect him from something his own logic had already outpaced. You can come, she said. But we'll prepare you properly. I'll explain what Azkaban is like and what Dementors do and how to manage them. We'll do that before Friday. He nodded. Satisfied. He started to go back toward the guest room, then paused. "The person who put the Horcruxes in me," he said. He wasn't looking at her, just speaking at the doorframe. "Is it the same person who decided Sirius Black went to prison without a fair trial?" Minerva was very still. "The same person who decided I'd live with the Dursleys," Harry said, still not turning around. "Who arranged all the pieces? Who decided everything?" The question didn't need an answer. They both knew it didn't. Harry went back to the guest room. Minerva sat at her desk for a long moment, looking at the wall. Then she picked up her wand, summoned a fresh piece of parchment, and wrote to a man she hadn't spoken to in 2 years, a former Auror named Alastair Moody who lived alone in a heavily fortified cottage in the Highlands and who trusted nobody except his own paranoia, which had, to date, never let him down. "I have found something," she wrote. "Something that changes everything. I need someone who knows how Albus Dumbledore thinks. Meet me at Hogwarts. Soon." She sent it. Then she went to the kitchen, made dinner, proper dinner, roast chicken and vegetables because she had noticed that Harry ate carefully and modestly in the way of someone who monitored his food supply, and she intended to cure him of the instinct to conserve by making sure conservation was never necessary, and called down the corridor that it was ready. Harry appeared promptly. He'd washed his face and found the other sock, she noticed. He sat down, looked at the plate, and then up at her. "This is a lot of food," he said, with the careful neutrality of someone who doesn't want to seem ungrateful but is visibly doing the maths on what they're supposed to do with a full dinner plate. "Good," Minerva said. "Eat all of it." "All of it?" "Ideally, yes." He looked at the plate again. Something crossed his face, not quite disbelief, more like a careful, cautious recalibration of expectations. Then he picked up his fork and started. They ate. Minerva told him about Azkaban, the factual version, the honest version, the version that acknowledged it was a terrible place without dramatizing it into something more frightening than useful to know. Harry asked 8 questions during the explanation, all precise, all relevant. He ate all his dinner. When he was done, he sat back and said, "If Sirius Black is my godfather and he's innocent, why is he still in there?" "Because the person who controlled the information," Minerva said carefully, "controlled the outcome." Harry turned his fork in his hand, looking at it. "Right," he said. "We're fixing that too." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Minerva said. "We are." He nodded and helped her clear the table, which she hadn't asked him to do and which he did with the automatic efficiency of someone used to earning their place in a house, stacking plates carefully and carrying them 2 at a time to the sink. She watched him and thought about the size of what had been done to him, not just the Horcruxes, not just the cupboard, but the 4 years of being the extra, the unwanted, the child who cleared his own plate because not clearing it had consequences, who ate carefully because plenty wasn't guaranteed, who monitored adult faces because adult moods determined his safety. All of it deliberate. All of it designed. "Harry," she said, when they were done. He turned. He had soap suds on his wrist. "You don't need to earn your place here," she said. "You can leave a dish if you want. You can leave the lights on. You don't have to." She stopped. Started again. "This is not the kind of place where things have conditions. You understand?" He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was doing several things at once, processing, believing slightly, wanting to believe more, guarding against wanting too much. "Okay," he said. He didn't leave any dishes. But later, when she walked past the guest room, the light under the door was on and she could hear him reading aloud to himself again, the magical theory this time, the section on core recalibration, and she thought that was enough for now. Rome wasn't built in a day and neither was safety. She went to her study and began the case file. Alastair Moody arrived Thursday night without warning, which was his signature approach, and he arrived via the fireplace in a shower of green flame that startled the portraits into indignant protests that he ignored completely. He was large and battered-looking with a magical eye that moved independently of its organic partner and a walk that suggested half his skeleton had been replaced at some point with something that worked slightly differently. He stood in Minerva's sitting room with a flask in one hand and the documentation in the other, and he read it the way he read everything, aggressively, like the document had personally affronted him and he was going to find out what it was hiding. He got to the third page, stopped, and looked up. "Where is he?" Moody said. "Asleep," Minerva said. "How much does the boy know?" "Everything relevant to his situation. Harry is," she paused, "not a child who benefits from managed information." Moody grunted. "How old?" 5. Something moved across the scarred landscape of Moody's face that was not quite the expression of a man who maintained his emotions at professional remove. He went back to the documentation, turned it over, found the binding architecture analysis. "Sirius did this analysis," he said. "Yes. He's right. This is Dumbledore's work." He said it bluntly, with the clarity of a man who has spent 40 years investigating dark magic and is no longer willing to soften his findings for political convenience. "I've seen Dumbledore's construction methodology before. He published theoretical work on soul magic in the 50s, classified work, Ministry Archive, not public. The binding structure here matches his theoretical framework." Minerva hadn't known that. She felt the cold stone in her chest get heavier. "You knew he'd published on it?" "I read everything, McGonagall. You know that." He set the documentation down. Picked up his flask. Put it down again without drinking. "He published it as theoretical, academic work on Grindelwald-era magic, how Voldemort's Horcruxes functioned, whether they could be reversed. I never liked the specificity of the theoretical models. Too precise for someone who was just analyzing." He looked at her. "He was designing." "The 20th fragment," Minerva said. Moody's magical eye rotated toward her. "What?" She told him what Sirius had found, the network structure, the amplification architecture, what a 20th fragment placed at the center would do. Moody listened without expression, which on his face was more alarming than any other expression. When she finished, he said, he was going to use the boy to channel Voldemort's destruction through the network and into, he stopped. Into himself. Minerva felt her stomach drop. What? Not a power source for Dumbledore to drain. A conduit. The network channels the power from the 19 Voldemort fragments outward to whoever controls the 20th. He looked at the documentation. The 20th fragment was never going to be a Horcrux. It was going to be a key. A control fragment. Held by Dumbledore. Held by Dumbledore. Moody looked at his flask again. This time he drank from it. The boy destroys Voldemort as planned, walks into death as the final Horcrux, kills the piece of Voldemort inside him, dies, except with the network in place. The destruction of 19 Voldemort soul fragments generates an enormous pulse of dark magic being annihilated. Through Albus's control fragment, the network channels that pulse, into Dumbledore, Minerva said. Giving him, Moody said, an unprecedented infusion of purified magical power from the annihilation of arguably the darkest soul of the age. He put the flask down. That's what the architecture is for. Not power. Ascension. The sitting room was very quiet. Minerva looked at the window. Outside, the Hogwarts grounds were dark and still, the lock reflecting no light because there was no moon. She thought about Albus Dumbledore, the man she had known for 30 years, the greatest wizard of the age, the defeater of Grindelwald, the man who had given her her first teaching post and her second chance when she'd failed at something she'd rather not think about, and who had smiled at her with those warm, distant eyes when she'd told him she was worried about the boy on Privet Drive. You said he believes he's right, Minerva said. He always believes he's right. That's the terrifying part. Moody looked at the documentation. He genuinely believes Voldemort will rise again and that when he does, someone will need to be powerful enough to face him. He believes that someone is Albus Dumbledore. He may even believe that what he's doing is necessary for the greater good. A pause. He's been using that phrase since 1945. It never stopped meaning whatever I've decided. From down the corridor came the faint sound of a page turning. Harry, awake later than usual, reading in the dark. Moody looked toward the sound. "What's he like?" he said, and the question was quiet enough that it might not have been meant to be asked aloud. "Extraordinary," Minerva said simply. "In ways I think will surprise everyone." Moody looked at the documentation one more time. Then he folded it and handed it back to her. "Friday. Azkaban. You'll need me there." "I wasn't planning, you're going to see Black." "Black's been in Azkaban for 4 years with Dementors." "He'll be," Moody stopped. "He might not be entirely coherent. You'll need someone he trusts enough to listen to, and he's known me since the First War." He picked up his flask again. "And you're bringing the boy, which is either the best idea or the worst idea depending on how Black responds to seeing him." "Harry insisted," Minerva said. Moody looked toward the corridor again. Toward the sound of the turning page. "Did he?" he said. "He was quite clear about it." Moody made a sound that was possibly the closest thing to a laugh his face currently allowed. "Right. I'll be at the gate at 9. He left through the fireplace, graceless and abrupt, green flame swallowing him mid-step. Minerva sat alone in the sitting room and let the full scale of what Moody had identified settle around her, the architecture, the intent, the scope of what Albus Dumbledore had been building since 1981. The boy in the cupboard. The soul pieces in the lattice. The plan that required Harry to die at a specific moment in a specific way so that a very old, very brilliant man could ascend to a power he'd decided the world needed him to have. And she thought about Harry sitting cross-legged on the Dursley floor eating shortbread biscuits at 9 years old, asking her what his mom was like. No. She picked up her wand. She had case files to build and a legal strategy to refine and an extraction plan to finalize and Friday to prepare for. She worked until dawn. Chapter 3, The Freeing Azkaban in November looked exactly like what it was. It rose out of the North Sea on a column of black rock that seemed less like geological formation and more like the sea had tried to swallow it and given up, and the prison itself hunched at the top like something that had survived by being too miserable to die. The boat that carried them from the mainland smelled of salt and old iron and the particular cold that came not from temperature but from proximity to things that consumed warmth as a biological function. Harry stood at the bow with both hands on the rail and watched it get closer. He was wearing a coat Minerva had bought him the previous day, a proper one, dark wool, his size, with actual buttons, and his glasses had been repaired by Poppy with a simple charm so the tape was gone. He looked, for the first time since Minerva had met him, like a child who was being taken care of. The coat seemed to confuse him slightly, in the way that new things confuse people who have learned not to expect them. Moody stood beside him, magical eye doing slow rotations across the water. "Dementors," Moody said. He didn't soften it. He'd agreed with Minerva the night before that Harry got the direct version of everything. "You'll feel them before you see them. Cold first, then a kind of draining. Like your happiness is being filtered out of you." "What do people do when that happens?" Harry asked. "Usually panic. Sometimes freeze." Moody looked at him sideways with his organic eye. "You think about something good. Strong memory. Hold it. And that helps." "It's the foundation of the Patronus charm," Moody said. "Which you can't cast yet. But the principle, opposing the cold with something warm, is the right instinct." Harry nodded and looked at the prison. "What's the strongest memory you use?" Moody was quiet for a moment. "My first arrest," he said. 1971. Dark wizard who'd been terrorizing a village in Cornwall for 3 years. Took him down alone in a barn at 2 in the morning. Felt like the work meant something. A pause. Yours? Harry thought about it with genuine consideration. The boat rocked. The prison got closer. He said, Professor McGonagall making eggs. Moody looked at him. It was 2 days ago, Harry said, slightly defensively. It's the best thing I've got so far. Moody turned back to the water and made the sound that might have been a laugh. That'll do, he said. Minerva, standing behind them, said nothing. She was doing the thing where she kept her expression carefully neutral by giving all her attention to the horizon. The boat docked at a stone pier that was slick with spray and something darker, and the prison gate was iron and old and opened with a sound like a decision being made that couldn't be taken back. The guard who met them was a ministry official in robes that had seen better decades, holding a clipboard with the specific dead-eyed efficiency of someone who had been working near Dementors long enough that they'd stopped noticing the effect. McGonagall, Moody, and the guard looked at Harry. This is a minor accompanied visit, properly authorized, Moody said, before Minerva could speak. He produced the paperwork, a thick sheaf of it, comprehensively prepared, because Moody approached paperwork the same way he approached dark wizards, which was to overwhelm them before they could organize a defense. Guardianship visit, welfare review category, granted under the 1978 standards. Signed off by Amelia Bones herself, if you'd like to check the seal. The guard looked at the seal. Checked it twice. Stood aside. They went in. The cold hit immediately, not the North Sea cold from outside but the other kind, the Dementor cold, the kind that reached through wool and skin and bone and found the place where warmth lived and put its fingers around it. Harry's breath came out white. He didn't freeze. He didn't look frightened. He tilted his chin up slightly and his jaw set and he kept walking, and Minerva noticed him touch the button at the front of his new coat, just briefly, just once, and then drop his hand. Eggs, she thought, with something that was not quite the feeling she usually associated with herself. The corridor was stone and torchlit and had cells on both sides, most of them dark, some with shapes in them that didn't look up as they passed. The guard led them deeper into the prison with the brisk indifference of someone taking a tour they'd given too many times. Moody walked without hesitation, magical eye ranging ahead. Harry walked close enough to Minerva that their arms occasionally touched, not quite holding on but not quite not. They stopped at a cell on the 3rd level. The guard unlocked it and stepped back. Sirius Black was in the far corner of the cell. He was 33 years old. He looked older than that in a way that had nothing to do with time. He was thin in the hollow way of someone who had forgotten to eat because eating required the kind of attention to the future that Azkaban systematically removed, and his hair was matted and long, and he was sitting with his back to the wall and his arms around his knees in the specific position of someone who had learned that small was safer. But he looked up when they came in, and his eyes, gray, Lily had said once, like expensive steel, like someone who made good decisions fast, those eyes were still there. Dulled, yes. Haunted. But looking at them. He looked at Moody. Then at Minerva. His expression was doing the slow, effortful work of someone trying to process reality after 4 years of not having much of it to process. Alastair, he said. His voice was rough from disuse. Black, Moody said. You look terrible. Thank you, Sirius said, with the ghost of something that had been, once, a very good sense of humor. I've been working on it. His gaze moved to Minerva. Professor McGonagall. A pause. Why are you here? To get you out, Minerva said. Sirius stared at her. Not today, she said. The legal process will take. I didn't do it, Sirius said. Not desperate. Not pleading. Just direct, with the flat, worn certainty of someone who has been telling the truth for 4 years to walls that didn't care. I know everyone in here says that. But I didn't. Peter Pettigrew betrayed your friends to Voldemort, faked his own death, framed you, and has been hiding as a rat ever since, Minerva said. Sirius went absolutely still. We know, Minerva said. We're building the case. Amelia Bones is involved. It won't be fast, but it will be thorough and it will hold. She looked at him steadily. I believe you. Alastor believes you. And more importantly, there are people with the legal standing to do something about it who are now paying attention. Sirius's jaw moved. He looked at Moody. Moody gave him a short nod. Why now? Sirius said. Why, what changed? Minerva stepped slightly to the side. Harry, who had been standing just behind her in the doorway, stepped forward into the cell. The sound Sirius Black made was not a word. It was something before words, something that lived in the part of a person that existed before they learned language, the part that responds to things the way an instrument responds to the right frequency. He looked at Harry and the hollowness of his face collapsed inward and then reorganized into something raw and shaking and completely unguarded. Harry looked back at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. You have James's hair, Sirius said finally, barely above a whisper. I know, Harry said. And my mum's eyes, apparently. Everyone keeps mentioning it. Something broke and remade itself in Sirius's expression. Yeah, he said. Yeah, that's, he stopped. He seemed to be doing significant internal structural work. You're so big. I'm actually quite small for my age, Harry said. A sound came out of Sirius that might, in another context, have been a laugh. James was short until he was 14 and then shot up 8 inches in a year, he said. Don't worry about it. Harry moved further into the cell, unhurried, and crouched down so they were more or less eye level. He looked at Sirius with those green eyes, assessing, direct, warm in the careful way of someone who is choosing to extend warmth rather than defaulting to it. Professor McGonagall told me you were supposed to look after me, he said. I was meant to, Sirius said. I'm sorry. It wasn't your fault, Harry said. Someone arranged it this way. The same someone who arranged quite a lot of things. He looked at Sirius steadily. We're fixing it. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. The cell was cold and dark and somewhere further down the corridor a Dementor was moving. The cold intensified briefly, and Minerva felt it move through her like a cold hand, and she thought deliberately and firmly about something warm. Harry's jaw set again. Moody didn't visibly react at all, which was either impressive or concerning. Sirius seemed to not notice. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was slowly, effortfully, like a door that had been stuck for a long time, beginning to open. What's your plan? Sirius said. Get the Horcruxes out of me first, Harry said. Then find the rest of them, there are others outside of me, and destroy those. Meanwhile Professor McGonagall and Amelia Bones build the legal case, get you out, and deal with, he paused. Dumbledore, Sirius said quietly. Harry looked at him. You know. I've had 4 years to think about who had the power to put me here without a trial, Sirius said. His voice had found steadiness from somewhere. There's only one answer. Harry nodded. Then you already know the shape of it. Tell me the details, Sirius said. All of them. His eyes moved briefly to Minerva. Please. Minerva pulled the short summary she'd prepared, clean, factual, 3 pages, and handed it to him. He read it right there, crouched against the wall, and Harry sat cross-legged on the cell floor with perfect equanimity and watched him read, and Moody stood in the doorway with his flask and his rotating eye, and Minerva stood in the middle of all of it and thought about what Albus Dumbledore had built and what they were taking apart. Sirius finished the summary. He set it down carefully on the floor. He looked at it for a moment. 19, he said. 19, Harry confirmed. Since you were 14 months old. According to Poppy's analysis, the earliest fragments were placed within weeks of the first Halloween, Minerva said. Sirius's jaw tightened. While James and Lily were, he stopped. Yes, Minerva said. The cold in the cell was very specific. Not just dementors. We're removing them, Harry said. Starting soon. Filius Flitwick is helping design the extraction process. He looked at Sirius. When you're out, I'd like you to help with the external Horcruxes. You knew Voldemort's world better than most, you fought in the First War. Sirius looked at him with an expression that was trying to process too many things simultaneously, the grief, the fury, the impossible fact of this 5-year-old child sitting on his cell floor making plans with the calm confidence of someone who has already decided which direction things are going. You're 5, Sirius said. I'm aware, Harry said. Is that a problem? James was 30 when Sirius stopped. Started again. You're very like him. And also completely unlike him. Which is, he ran a hand through his matted hair. He would have loved you so much. You know that? Harry looked at his hands for a moment. Just a moment. Professor McGonagall told me about him, he said. And about my mum. He paused. She said my mum would have burned the world down. Lily would have absolutely burned the world down, Sirius said. Something softened in his face. She nearly burned me down twice in 3rd year and I deserved it both times. What did you do? Put a permanent sticking charm on all of Slughorn's portrait collection so that every portrait in his office only showed the portrait next to it, a very rude hand gesture. A pause. Lily caught me in the act. She hexed me into a hedgehog for 20 minutes. Which was, he seemed to be deciding whether to admit something. Honestly fair. Harry's mouth curved. It was the most unguarded smile Minerva had seen from him, quick and bright and entirely genuine. 20 minutes is very precise, he said. She set a timer. Harry laughed. It was a short laugh, slightly surprised, like laughter was something that sometimes happened to him when he wasn't expecting it. But it was real. Moody, in the doorway, appeared to be examining the ceiling with great attention. They stayed for 40 minutes. Sirius asked careful, pointed questions about the legal strategy and about the Horcrux extraction process and about where Harry was living and whether he was safe, and Harry answered most of the questions before Minerva could, and by the end of it Sirius was sitting straighter and his eyes had something in them that 4 years of Dementors had nearly eaten but not quite. When the guard knocked to signal time, Harry stood and looked at Sirius. We'll be back, he said. Before the end of the month. I'll have started the extractions by then. I'll be here, Sirius said, with a ghost of the old black humor, dark and dry and slightly absurd. I have nowhere pressing to be. Harry looked at him for a moment longer. Then he said, quietly, I'm glad you're not dead. Sirius's throat moved. Me too, kid, he said. Me too. The first extraction happened on a Monday. They'd spent the intervening week in preparation, Poppy and Filius in long, technical, occasionally heated discussion about methodology while Minerva supervised and Harry listened and contributed 3 more observations that Filius had written down with the focused attention of someone taking a student seriously. Moody warded the hospital wing, where they decided to work, with the comprehensive paranoia that was his main personality trait and also, it turned out, extremely reassuring. Harry had read everything he could find on the subject, which in Hogwarts's restricted section amounted to more than most people found in a lifetime. Minerva had unlocked the restricted section for him without him asking, he'd mentioned the restriction casually and she'd handed him the key the same evening and watched his expression do that brief recalibrating flicker and then settle into something that trusted without quite relaxing yet. He'd been reading for 4 days. He'd asked 46 questions, Filius had counted. The morning of the first extraction he woke early and appeared at the kitchen table with the mathematical notebook and worked through what appeared to be a self-designed stress test calculation for the detuning frequency Filius had proposed, and when Filius arrived at 8 he handed it over and Filius spent 15 minutes checking the work with an expression of increasing astonishment. You've identified a potential resonance spike at the transition point, Filius said. At the detuning apex, Harry said. If the counter frequency is applied as a single sustained wave, the fragment resists and you get spike. But if it's applied as a modulated pulse, shorter applications, slightly varying frequency, the resistance breaks up and you don't get the spike. Phileas looked at the calculation. Then at Harry. Then at the calculation. Where did you learn modulated frequency theory? He said. I read your published paper on it, Harry said. From 1974. Professor McGonagall had it in her study. Phileas turned to Minerva. He read my 1974 paper. It appears so, Minerva said. That paper is, the mathematics alone. He asked me about 4 of the equations, Minerva said. I helped with 2 of them. The other 2 he worked out. Phileas looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has just discovered something that changes their understanding of what is possible. I'll revise the frequency application protocol, Phileas said. I'd suggest 15-cycle modulation at the transition apex, Harry said. Based on the resonance calculation. Yes, Phileas said, already reaching for his notes. Yes, that's, he looked up. Have you considered publishing this at some point? I'm 5, Harry said. People have published important theoretical work at younger ages. Name one. Phileas opened his mouth. Closed it. I'll think of one, he said. Harry's mouth twitched. The extraction room was the hospital wing's private treatment bay, warded with Moody's thorough paranoia and lit with the steady gold light of prepared healing lamps. The examination table had been modified. Phileas had added focus nodes at 7 points that would help anchor the extraction work, and Poppy's instruments were arranged with the methodical precision of someone who liked everything in reach and slightly to the right. Harry sat on the table and looked at the focus nodes with interest. Phileas added those, Minerva said. I can see his work in them, Harry said. The frequency signature. Phileas made a small sound that was almost certainly undignified. Poppy came in, checked her instruments, checked the wards, and came to stand in front of Harry with the direct, warm manner she used for patients who needed honesty more than comfort. First extraction today is one of the peripheral fragments, she said. Neural thread anchor, right side. Not a core fragment, we discussed the sequencing. She glanced at Harry. The modulated frequency protocol your calculation suggested should reduce the spike. But there will still be some intensity. I know, Harry said. I'm ready. If at any point you want to stop, I'll say so, Harry said. But I won't want to. Poppy held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded and picked up her wand. Phileas stood at the focus node array, wand angled precisely. Moody stood by the door because that was where Moody stood in every room regardless of context. Minerva sat in the chair beside the table, not in the way, close enough. Ready? Poppy said. Yes, Harry said. The first pulse of the extraction was visible, a faint shimmer in the air around Harry's right temple, the healing lamp catching it and turning it briefly gold. Harry's hands, flat on his thighs, pressed down once. His jaw set. He kept his eyes open and focused on a point in the middle distance with the controlled concentration of someone running a calculation in their head. The shimmer intensified. Phileas shifted the frequency in the 15-cycle modulation, smooth and controlled, and Poppy tracked the fragment with her wand in precise, small movements, not dragging, guiding, the way you guided rather than forced. Harry made a sound. Not a cry, more like the sound of someone lifting something heavy, brief and controlled, the acknowledgement of effort. His hands pressed harder against his thighs. Halfway, Poppy said. The shimmer became a point of light. Phileas's modulation shifted up 2 cycles. The fragment, Minerva could see it now, a dark condensation in the gold light, small and dense and wrong in the way that all dark magic was wrong, a wrongness you felt rather than saw, moved toward the surface. Harry's breathing was deliberate. In through the nose. Out controlled. The thing Moody had told him on the boat, Minerva realized, think about something warm. His eyes had not moved from that middle distance point. Whatever he was holding in his head, he was holding it. Almost, Poppy said. The fragment broke free. The sound it made was like a chord resolving on an instrument you couldn't quite hear, felt rather than heard, a resonance shift that made the healing lamps briefly double in brightness. The fragment hung for a second in the air between Poppy's wand and Harry's temple, dark and small and looking deeply out of place in the golden room. Poppy moved her wand in a sharp, controlled arc and the fragment went into the containment vessel, a glass sphere mounted on a lead-lined stand that Sirius had prepared with 4 separate seal charms. The sphere went dark around it. Harry let out a long breath. Then he straightened, blinked, and looked at Minerva. Interesting, he said. Minerva's heart rate, which had been conducting its own private emergency, began to consider de-escalating. Are you all right? Better. He tilted his head slightly, the way he did when he was assessing something. It's like, he thought for a moment. Like when you've had a faint sound in the background for so long you stopped hearing it, and then it stops, and the silence is louder than the sound was. Poppy was already running a diagnostic. The golden script scrolled. She read it and made notes and read it again, and her expression was carefully professional. Magical output has increased 17%, she said. Sirius made a sharp movement. From a single peripheral extraction? The modulated frequency protocol reduced spike damage and allowed cleaner separation, Poppy said. She looked at Harry. Your calculation was correct. The network is showing instability at the nearest adjacent anchor points. The lattice is responding to the extraction. Harry nodded. So the next ones will be slightly more volatile at the extraction point, Poppy said. But also slightly less stable in their anchoring. Which means easier to reach. She looked at him. How are you feeling? Truthfully. Harry considered the question with actual attention, doing his own internal diagnostic. Like I want to do the next one, he said. We're waiting 3 days minimum between extractions, Poppy said firmly. I know, Harry said. I read your notes. A pause. I agree with the reasoning. 3 days is correct. Poppy, who had spent the last 30 years arguing with students about medical advice and had never once had one preemptively agree with the reasoning, had a brief visible moment of not knowing what to do with this information. Right, she said. Good. 3 days. Same time, Harry said. Same time. He slid off the table and stood on the hospital wing floor, and the healing lamps caught him, and Minerva noticed, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that there was something in how he held himself that was different from how he'd been 4 days ago in the Desley cupboard. Straighter, maybe. Or just more present in his own body. As if the small silence left by the first fragment was already filling with something that belonged there. He looked at the containment sphere. At the small dark thing inside it. The first piece of what had been done to him, now separate and sealed and permanently outside. He didn't say anything about it. He turned to Sirius. Your modulated frequency paper, he said. There's a follow-up calculation I want to show you. About the transition resonance at higher integration fragments. Sirius pulled out his notebook. Show me. They walked out of the hospital wing side by side, the tiny charms professor with his waving quill and the 5-year-old with the mathematical notebook, already deep in a technical discussion that required Minerva to concentrate to follow, and that Moody, falling into step beside her, made no attempt to follow at all. Well, Moody said. Yes, Minerva said. He's going to be a problem for everyone. He's going to be extraordinary, Minerva said. Same thing, Moody said, not unkindly. 12 days. 6 extractions. Each one was different. The neural thread fragments came free with the sharp, clean quality Poppy had described, intense at the apex, quick to resolve, the silence afterward coming in small clear increments. The cardiac resonance fragments were slower and more complex, taking longer to guide and producing in Harry a very specific expression during the process, not pain exactly, more like concentration at its absolute extreme, like he was solving the hardest calculation he'd ever encountered and would not stop until it resolved. After the fourth extraction, 17% had become 31. After the sixth, his accidental magic, which had been producing periodic surges that Moody's wards handled with professional ease, stopped being accidental. Minerva noticed it first. She was in the kitchen reaching for the kettle when Harry appeared in the doorway, and the kettle, on its own shelf 4 feet away, moved to his hand before she'd finished reaching. He caught it, looked at his hand. "I didn't mean to do that," he said. "Didn't you?" Minerva said. He frowned at his hand. "I was thinking about tea." "You intended the tea, if not the specific action," Minerva said. "Your magic is filling in." He put the kettle down carefully and looked at it. Then he looked at the far wall. "Accio," he said. The mathematical notebook flew off the counter and into his hand. He looked at it. At her. "You're not supposed to be able to perform summoning charms at 5, Minerva said. "I know," Harry said. He turned the notebook over in his hands. "Is that a problem?" "No," Minerva said. "Absolutely not. I'm just noting it." He tried 3 more things that afternoon: basic levitation, a lumos, and a reparo on the small ceramic mug Moody had broken by setting it down with excessive force that morning. All 3 worked on the first attempt. The lumos was brighter than a first-year student's by a considerable margin, and the reparo fused the mug so completely that the crack disappeared without a seam. Moody, watching from the doorway, 31% was an underestimate. "We've only removed 6, Harry said. "There are 13 left." He said it with the calm, forward-facing practicality of someone working through a problem list. Not excited, not frightened. Just noting where they were and where they needed to be. But that evening, after dinner, he came to Minerva's study and stood in the doorway and said, "Can I try something?" She looked up from the case files. "That depends." He held out his hand. A small light appeared in his palm, not lumos, not a directed spell, just light, soft and steady, like a candle that had decided to exist. He looked at it and then at her with an expression that was doing the complicated thing, the one that was processing something larger than what was on the surface. "It just happened," he said. "I was thinking about," he paused. "Nothing specific. I was just calm." Minerva looked at the light. It was steady. Warm. It wasn't a spell she'd taught him, it wasn't a formal spell at all, more like raw magic finding its own expression because the channels were clear enough now to let it through. "Is that normal?" Harry said. "No," Minerva said. "It's not normal at all." He looked at the light in his hand. Something in his expression was very young and very still and present in a way that most adults managed only occasionally. "I like it," he said quietly. "You should," Minerva said. He closed his hand. The light went out. "I've been thinking about the core fragments," he said, shifting gears with the speed of someone whose mind moved in multiple tracks simultaneously. "The detuning frequency for a core anchor is going to be significantly higher intensity than the peripheral work. I've been running the calculations." He held out the notebook, open to a page dense with numbers. "The 15-cycle modulation won't be sufficient. I think we need a variable cycle protocol that adjusts dynamically to the fragment's resistance pattern." Minerva looked at the calculations. She was a competent transfiguration theorist and a more than competent applied mathematician, and the calculations were at the outer edge of what she could follow quickly. "Show this to Phileas tomorrow," she said. "I was going to," Harry said. "I wanted you to see it first." She looked at him. He was watching her read with the attentiveness of someone who valued her opinion specifically, not just any available expert, and the specificity of that, the deliberate choice to bring this to her first, went somewhere it was going to stay. The variable cycle approach, she said, pointing at the third line. How does it handle the frequency drift during resistance peaks? He leaned over and explained. He was articulate and precise, and halfway through the explanation pulled a pencil from behind his ear and started drawing the frequency curve on a blank page with quick, confident strokes. They spent 2 hours on it. When he went to bed, she sat for a while looking at the notebook he'd left with her. 12 days since the scan. 6 extractions. 31% increase in magical output, and she had a feeling that figure was already outdated. And Dumbledore had still not come. She had expected him sooner. His silence worried her more than his presence would have, because Dumbledore's silence meant he was thinking, and Dumbledore thinking meant he was building a counter-move, and the counter-move would be thoughtful and patient and aimed at something she hadn't anticipated. She wrote to Amelia. Any movement? Amelia wrote back within the hour. The investigation is formally open. I've frozen the relevant guardianship arrangements under welfare review. He knows something is happening. My sources say he's been in contact with the minister. No direct approach yet. But Minerva, he found out about the visit to Azkaban. Someone at the prison told him. Minerva wrote back, then we need to move faster on Black. Amelia's response took longer this time. Then, the documentation is sufficient. I can file for emergency trial review on the Pettigrew evidence alone. But if we go public with the trial review, he'll know we have Black on our side. It reveals our hand. Minerva looked at the letter for a long moment. Then she wrote, good. Let him see it. We're not hiding anymore. She sent it and went back to the case files and worked with the specific, focused intensity of someone who has decided that patience was no longer the strategy. The message came on a Wednesday evening. It was from Dumbledore, the first direct communication in the 3 weeks since she'd taken Harry. Not aggressive. Not threatening. In the warm, measured style she'd read 10,000 times before, as familiar as her own handwriting. Minerva, it read. I believe we are overdue for a conversation. There are things I should explain, and things I suspect you've discovered that I would rather discuss than allow to be misunderstood. I'll be at Hogwarts Thursday morning. I look forward to seeing you both. Both. Not you. Both. He knew Harry was here. He'd known for a while, probably. He'd been allowing it, watching, calculating. And now he'd decided the time was right and he was coming here as if he owned the building, which, technically, he did, and the both was very specifically chosen to let her know he intended to speak to Harry. Minerva looked at the letter. She showed it to Harry. He read it. Looked at the word both. Looked at Minerva. He's coming to explain himself, Harry said. Or to reassess the situation, Minerva said. Or both. What do you want to do? Harry said. The question, the fact that he asked it, that it was genuinely a question and not a courtesy, was not lost on her. I want to let him come, she said. I want to hear what he says. And I want Moody in the next room and I want you present but not manipulated, Harry said. Yes. He looked at the letter again. At the word both again. He designed me, he said. Not bitter. Not frightened. Just level. He decided what I was for before I could speak. Yes, Minerva said. I'd like to meet him, Harry said. She looked at him. I'd like to look at him, Harry said, and let him explain himself. And then I'd like to say what I think. He handed the letter back to her. Can I do that? Yes, Minerva said. You absolutely can. She wrote back, Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. We'll be here. She sent the letter and sat back and thought about Albus Dumbledore walking into this castle tomorrow to explain himself to the boy he'd spent 4 years preparing to sacrifice, and she thought about the 12 words she'd heard Harry say once in a conversation about something else entirely, words so simple and direct they'd rearranged the air in the room. She thought she had some idea what Thursday was going to look like. She hoped she was right. Chapter 4. The architect. Thursday arrived grey and still, the kind of Scottish morning that had no strong feelings about anything and conveyed them thoroughly through the weather. Harry was up at 5:30. Minerva knew because she was up at 5 and he was already in the kitchen when she got there, sitting at the table with the mathematical notebook and a cup of tea he'd made himself. He was wearing the dark coat over his pajamas, which she chose not to comment on. He looked up when she came in. "He'll try to explain it in terms of the greater good," he said, without preamble. "That's his framework. Moody told me about the phrase. He's been using it since Grindelwald." Minerva went to the kettle. "Yes," she said. "That's likely. And he'll be genuinely convinced he's right," Harry said. "Not performing conviction. Actually convinced. Probably. That's harder to argue with than someone who knows they're wrong," Harry said. He turned a page in the notebook. "Someone who knows they're wrong at least has access to the correct answer. Someone who's convinced they're right has locked the door from the inside." Minerva poured her tea. Looked at him. "When did you work that out?" "Last night. I was thinking about what to say to him." He looked at the notebook. "I don't want to argue about whether what he did was wrong. He'll have counters for every argument, he's had years to build them. I want to say something he can't counter." "And have you found it?" "Yes," Harry said. He didn't elaborate. He drank his tea and went back to the notebook. Minerva sat across from him and they had breakfast in companionable quiet, the castle making its old stone sounds around them, and she thought about what he'd said, locked the door from the inside, and thought that James Potter would have laughed and Lily Evans would have nodded and written it down. Moody arrived at 8 with Phileas in tow, both of them forewarned by last night's brief notes from Minerva. Moody immediately checked every ward in the castle within his reach, tested 3 of them twice, and positioned himself in the small sitting room adjacent to Minerva's study with the practiced invisibility of someone who has spent 40 years in places where being visible was a liability. Phileas sat with Harry over the variable cycle frequency calculations for an hour, partly because the work needed doing and partly because Minerva suspected they both found it grounding, the clarity of numbers when the rest of the morning was going to be anything but. At 9:45, Harry closed the notebook. "I'm going to change," he said. He came back in 10 minutes in the clean dark trousers and green jumper Minerva had bought him the same day as the coat, practical choices, nothing elaborate, but properly fitting and properly his, and he'd combed his hair into the temporary submission it maintained before it inevitably reasserted James's chaos. He sat in the chair across from Minerva's desk and waited with the particular stillness he carried that was not patience exactly but something more active, the stillness of someone fully present and fully ready. The knock came at 10 o'clock precisely. Albus Dumbledore was never late. He was exactly as Minerva had seen him 10,000 times, tall, white-haired, robes of deep midnight blue with a subtle silver pattern that caught the light, half-moon glasses on the end of his long nose, and the eyes that had always seemed to see further and deeper than anyone else's, which now, for the first time, she looked at and thought, yes, and what are they looking for, exactly? He looked at the room as he came in, Minerva's study, familiar to him from decades of conversations, and then at Harry, and the look lasted a precise, calibrated half-second before it softened into something warm and grandfatherly, and Minerva caught the calibration and put it away for later. "Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was warm. It was always warm. Minerva wondered how many decisions had been made easier by that voice being warm. Harry looked at him. He didn't stand. He'd been in the chair before Dumbledore arrived and he stayed in it, which was not rudeness, there was nothing aggressive in his posture, but it was a refusal of the social choreography that the warm entrance was designed to initiate, and Dumbledore's eyes, briefly, registered the refusal. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. Polite. Level. The same tone he used for everything he hadn't yet decided about. Dumbledore looked at Minerva. She gestured to the chair across from Harry and sat behind her desk, which put her between them and also behind the desk, which was where she sat when she wanted to make it clear that this was her room. Dumbledore sat. He looked at Harry with the warm eyes and the gentle expression and said, "I imagine you have questions." "Yes," Harry said. "I'll get to them. I'd like to hear what you came to say first." Dumbledore regarded him for a moment. Something adjusted very slightly in his manner, not the warmth remained intact, but something underneath it, a readjustment of approach. He had come in with a framework, Minerva thought, and Harry had just politely declined to inhabit it. "I came," Dumbledore said, "because I believe you found things that must seem very alarming out of context, and because you deserve to understand the full picture." "Yes," Harry said. "I do. The world has faced a darkness that most people, thankfully, will never fully understand. Lord Voldemort, I know who he is," Harry said. "I know what he did to my parents. I know about the Horcruxes, his, and mine. I know about the prophecy. I've read the relevant documentation. You don't need to provide background." A pause. "You can go straight to the explanation." Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. Then at Minerva. She kept her expression neutral. He looked back at Harry. "Very well. I will tell you plainly." He folded his hands. "When Voldemort attempted to kill you, something happened that I had theorized was possible but had not been certain of. A fragment of his soul, split from the violence of that night, attached itself to you. The only living vessel available." He paused. "Had I left it there untreated and undirected, it would eventually have caused you tremendous harm. The soul fragment would have grown in influence. It might have cost you your mind, your identity, your life." Harry was listening with total attention. He didn't respond yet. "I made a decision," Dumbledore said. "A very difficult decision, with consequences I have carried for 4 years. The fragment was already there. I could not remove it without research I did not yet have. But I could, with great care, and with the intention of ultimately protecting both you and the wider world, work with the existing structure. Direct it. Ensure that when the time came, the fragments could be used to undo what Voldemort had done rather than simply destroyed randomly." "The network," Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes, briefly, did the thing again. "You're aware of the network structure?" "Filius Flitwick analyzed it," Harry said. "He's very good." "Filius is exceptional," Dumbledore said, and the warmth for Filius was genuine, which made it more complicated. "Yes. The network. My intention was to create a structure that would, at the critical moment, channel the destruction of Voldemort's soul fragments in a controlled and directed way rather than allowing an uncontrolled release of dark magic that could have been catastrophic." "And the 20th fragment," Harry said. "The control fragment. What was that for?" The pause was very brief. "An ordinary person would have missed it. A stabilizing anchor," Dumbledore said. "To ensure the network's discharge was directed safely away from you." "That's not what Filius concluded," Harry said. Filius concluded the 20th fragment would allow whoever held it to channel the network's output into themselves," Harry said. "An ascension structure. A power transfer from the annihilation of 19 Voldemort soul fragments directed into the holder of the 20th. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "Was Filius wrong?" The study was very quiet. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. The warm eyes were doing something Minerva hadn't seen them do before, calculating without the usual screen of benevolence over the calculation. He was deciding, she realized, how much Harry had already worked out and how much of the explanation he could still shape. "Filius's analysis is technically correct," Dumbledore said, after a moment. "But the framing was the 20th fragment for you," Harry said. Not accusatory. Not angry. Just a question that intended to be answered. Another pause. "Yes," Dumbledore said. Minerva's hands, under the desk, pressed flat on her knees. And the power it would give you, Harry said. What were you going to do with it? Face whatever remained of Voldemort's influence, Dumbledore said, and his voice was still steady, still warm, and he believed it. Minerva could hear that he believed it. Ensure that nothing of that darkness could rise again. There are things still in the world that require a power of that magnitude to address. I am old, Harry. I have perhaps 10, 15 years of full capability remaining. After Voldemort, after the war, the work of protection does not end. I intended to be capable of completing it. Harry looked at him. The green eyes were very still. And me dying, Harry said. The death that was supposed to happen. When I walked into Voldemort and destroyed the soul fragment inside me, that was the plan. Dumbledore said nothing. I was supposed to die, Harry said. That was always the plan. It was. Dumbledore stopped. Started again. It was a necessary component of the original structure, yes. I spent 4 years researching alternatives, but you didn't find one you liked as much. The room was very still. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry looked back. The silence between them was not empty, it was full of the thing that happened when someone who has been building a very careful story encounters someone who has already read the last page. You placed those fragments in me after my parents died, Harry said. Not one, not by accident. 18 deliberately placed in addition to the one Voldemort created. You did that when I was 14 months old. While my parents were being buried. The timing was you acting before anyone could interfere, Harry said. You moved fast because you knew if anyone looked too closely at the plan they'd stop it. You put Sirius Black in Azkaban because he was the person most likely to look closely. You put me with the Dursleys because an isolated child with no advocates is easy to manage. He paused. That's not a great or good calculation. That's just architecture. Dumbledore was very still. I'm not angry, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with what appeared to be genuine uncertainty. The first time, Minerva thought, she had seen Albus Dumbledore look genuinely uncertain about something. I'm not, Harry said. Anger is for things you didn't see coming. I've had 3 weeks to think about this. I've read everything available. I've talked to Moody and Sirius and Professor McGonagall, and I understand the full architecture of what you built, including why you built it. He leaned forward slightly in the chair, elbows on his knees. You looked at the problem, Voldemort, the darkness, the threat to the world, and you decided you were the only person capable of solving it permanently. Not Harry Potter. You. Harry Potter was the mechanism. You were the solution. And you spent 4 years building the mechanism while telling everyone else you were protecting a child. Dumbledore's jaw moved once. He said nothing. You're brilliant, Harry said. I'm not dismissing that. The architecture you built is genuinely extraordinary. Sirius said so. The theoretical work is, he paused. It's remarkable. And you did it for reasons you believe are good. I understand that. He sat back. But I'm going to need you to understand something too. Yes? Dumbledore said, quietly. I am not the mechanism, Harry said. I'm the person. And those are different things. The mechanism gets used until it breaks and then you build a new one. The person, he stopped. The person gets to decide. The study was absolutely silent. Outside, a bird was doing something in the grounds. Far away. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. And something moved in his face, something Minerva watched carefully because she needed to know what it was. It was not guilt exactly, not remorse exactly, not the performance of either. It was something more honest and more troubling, the look of an extremely intelligent person confronting a counterargument they cannot immediately dismantle and knowing it. You're 5 years old, Dumbledore said. Not dismissive. Almost wondering. Yes, Harry said. And you still can't answer it. Another silence. What are you going to do? Dumbledore said. The question was direct, stripped of warmth for the first time, one strategist to another. Remove the Horcruxes, Harry said. Find and destroy the external ones. End Voldemort's ability to return on my terms, not yours. And then, he looked at Dumbledore with something that was not unkind but was absolute. Live my life. Which I get to decide about. Not you. Dumbledore looked at him for a very long moment. Then he looked at Minerva. She met his gaze across the desk, 30 years of knowledge between them, all the conversations and the trust and the deference, and underneath all of it, the single unignorable fact of what he had done and the single equally unignorable fact of the child sitting across from him who should not have had to say any of this. Minerva, Dumbledore said. You understand that Voldemort is not gone. You understand what is still out there. I understand more than I did 3 weeks ago, Minerva said. Yes. The plan required a child to die, Minerva said. Her voice was perfectly controlled. I would suggest, Albus, that we find a better plan. There may not be, there will be, Harry said. They both looked at him. There will be a better plan, Harry said, with the calm certainty of someone who has not yet encountered the limits of his own capability and therefore has not learned to doubt it. We remove the Horcruxes from me. We find and destroy the others. We deal with Voldemort when he resurfaces, and we do it without anyone being required to die for someone else's strategy. He looked at Dumbledore. Unless you'd like to help. You know more about his Horcruxes than anyone. That knowledge is actually useful. The part where I was a mechanism isn't. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. I put you in danger, Dumbledore said finally. It was quiet. Not an apology exactly, more like a man saying something aloud that he had been not saying for a long time. Yes, Harry said. I told myself it was necessary. I know. I am not certain, Dumbledore said, slowly, that I was wrong about the threat. I think you weren't wrong about the threat, Harry said. I think you were wrong about the solution. Those are different things. A pause. You can still be right about the problem and wrong about the answer. Most people are. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, your mother would have said something very like that. Harry held his gaze without flinching. Good, he said. The morning light through the study window had shifted from grey to something with a hint of gold in it. The castle made a sound, old stones, old wood, the particular settle of a building that had been standing for 1,000 years and had seen a great many arguments in its time and had opinions about none of them. I would like, Dumbledore said, addressing this to both of them with the careful precision of a man rephrasing his terms, to contribute what I know about Voldemort's external Horcruxes. There are objects, locations, history that would take you years to reconstruct independently that I can provide directly. He paused. I am aware that this does not, he stopped again. I understand that information is not reparation. No, Harry said. It isn't. But it's useful. He looked at Minerva. Professor McGonagall? Minerva looked at Dumbledore. She looked at him the way she had been looking at him for 30 years, the long knowledge, the complicated thing, the weight of what she now knew against the weight of what she had believed, and she thought about Sirius Black in his cell for 4 years, and she thought about a child in a cupboard under the stairs with a book about planets, and she thought about the warm smile through frosted glass. The information, she said. Yes. We'll take the information. A pause. The rest is a conversation for another day and a different setting. With Amelia Bones in the room. Dumbledore's jaw moved once. He nodded. The DMLE investigation, Minerva said. You won't interfere with it. A long pause. No, Dumbledore said. I won't interfere with it. And Sirius Black's trial review. Another pause. I'll provide testimony if asked. Harry looked at him. Honest testimony. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Yes, he said. Honest testimony. Something settled in the room, not resolution, nothing as clean as that. More like a boundary being drawn in a place where there had been no boundary before, clearly enough that everyone present knew where it was. Dumbledore stood. He was still tall, still white-haired, still the most powerful wizard of the age, and he stood in Minerva McGonagall's study across from a 5-year-old child who had just spoken 12 consecutive truths he couldn't counter, and whatever he was feeling about that was somewhere behind the warm eyes and not available for inspection. I'll write down what I know, he said. The locations. The objects. The history. He looked at Harry one more time. You're going to be remarkable, he said. It wasn't flattery. It was the simple statement of someone recognizing what they were looking at. I'm already remarkable, Harry said pleasantly. You built the suppression structure that's been limiting it. We're removing that. Dumbledore looked at him for a half-second. Then something crossed his face that, in another context, might have been the ghost of a smile. He left. Minerva listened to his footsteps down the corridor. She heard the main entrance of the castle close. She sat in the quiet of her study with the morning light and the old stones and the case files and the boy in the green jumper, and she let herself breathe. He knew, Harry said. When I said he'd moved fast because he knew people would interfere, he knew I was right. He didn't deny it. No, Minerva said. He didn't. He's not going to stop, Harry said. Not completely. He'll recalibrate. Find a different angle. He said it without heat, just assessment. But he'll give us the information because it still serves the part of the plan he hasn't let go of, Voldemort being destroyed. He just needs to accept that the destruction mechanism changes. Minerva looked at him. You're sure he'll give us the information honestly? No, Harry said. But Moody will check it. Won't he? He said it toward the wall adjoining the sitting room. A pause. Then Moody's voice, muffled but audible, every word, 3 times. Harry looked at the wall with mild satisfaction. Good. Minerva pressed her lips together firmly. You knew he was in there. I could feel the ward pattern, Harry said. His specific work. It has a frequency, like Filius's nodes but different. More aggressive in the layering. He said it matter-of-factly, the way he described everything he observed. Then, glancing at the door, is there more shortbread? Dumbledore's information arrived the next morning in a sealed package, 42 pages of dense, precise documentation on Voldemort's Horcrux history, locations, objects, magical signatures, and suspected current states. Moody went through it line by line over 6 hours with his magical eye and his considerable expertise and emerged looking like a man who has found what he expected and is not happy to have been right. It's accurate, he said. As far as I can tell, every word. He's given us the full picture. The full picture was, a diary, already destroyed, this one Dumbledore had located and handled in the late 1980s, before events had moved out of his control. He mentioned it in a footnote with the clinical precision of someone who has moved on. A ring, in a ruined house in Little Hangleton, bearing what Dumbledore's notes described with careful understatement as a curse of unusual sophistication and lethality. He recommended extreme caution. He did not recommend sending a 5-year-old, which was the first piece of implicit advice Minerva agreed with. A locket, stolen years ago from a location called a cave, current whereabouts uncertain, last known in the possession of a man named Mundungus Fletcher via a chain of unpleasant transactions. A cup, in a Gringotts vault belonging to the Lestrange family. A diadem, in Hogwarts itself, in a room that Dumbledore described as the Room of Hidden Things, accessible on the 7th floor. A snake, Voldemort's familiar, Nagini, location currently unknown but certain to be wherever Voldemort's diminished spirit had found refuge. And Harry. Dumbledore's notes on Harry were 3 pages long and written in a different tone from the rest, more careful, slower, the handwriting less certain. He described the network architecture honestly, matching what Phileas had found. He described his original intent honestly, including the 20th fragment. He described 4 years of research into alternatives honestly, including the ones that hadn't worked and the ones that were theoretically possible but that he acknowledged he had not fully explored. At the bottom of the 3rd page, in writing that was smaller than the rest, I told myself there was no other way. I am no longer certain that was true. I am certain I did not look as hard as I should have. Harry read the 3 pages twice. Didn't say anything about them. Put the documentation in the file he'd started keeping, a clear-faced folder with a precise handwritten label that said Horcrux Project with a small subsection label that said Resolved on the left side and Outstanding on the right. He moved the first Horcrux fragment, still in Poppy's containment sphere, to the Resolved side. Then he added the external Horcrux locations to the Outstanding side in order of estimated accessibility, which he derived from Dumbledore's notes with the focused logical method he brought to everything, and he showed Minerva his ordering. She looked at it. The diadem, she said, pointing at item 1. You've ranked the Hogwarts one first. It's here, Harry said. Why travel when we can do the one that's already in the building? He looked at her. Can we look for it today? The 7th floor corridor has several rooms that don't always appear, Minerva said. The room of requirement is documented. The room of hidden things is less so. Dumbledore's notes described the entrance condition, Harry said. He found the relevant passage and read it aloud. Walk past the wall 3 times while thinking of a place to hide something. The room appears when the need is genuine. He looked up. That's interesting. It's responsive magic. The room reads intent. Yes, Minerva said. So I think I need to find something hidden there rather than I need to hide something. The notes suggest the room reformats for different needs, Minerva said carefully. Let's try it, Harry said. The 7th floor corridor was empty in the way that Hogwarts was always empty in late November when there were no students, full, in the specific way of old places, with the memory of crowds and noise, but physically quiet. Their footsteps echoed. Portraits watched them pass with the mild interest of people whose primary entertainment was foot traffic. Harry walked past the blank stretch of wall 3 times, and Minerva watched his face, the specific inward focus, something clarifying in his expression as he concentrated the intent. The door appeared on the 3rd pass. It was large, arched, and deeply ordinary-looking, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had been dramatic. Harry pushed it open. The room of hidden things was vast and impossible in the way that many things at Hogwarts were vast and impossible, a cathedral of discarded objects, centuries of things people had hidden, brought here and forgotten, creating a landscape of accumulated secrets as tall as cliffs and as dense as forest. Broken furniture and old equipment and forgotten experiments and things that hummed and things that ticked and things that simply sat and emanated a mild wrongness that prickled at the back of the neck. Harry walked in and stood very still. It's in here somewhere, he said. Dumbledore's notes suggest the diadem is on a broken bust somewhere in the eastern. Harry held up one hand. He had his eyes half closed and his head slightly tilted, and the expression was the one he wore when he was reading a frequency. I can feel it, he said. Minerva went still. You can feel the Horcrux. It's like the fragments inside me, he said, but external. The same wrong frequency. He turned slowly. Pointed. That way. He moved through the stacked debris with the focused confidence of someone following a sound, turning sideways between furniture stacks, ducking under an enormous rolled carpet, stepping over the carcass of what had at some point been a very complicated Muggle appliance. Minerva followed. She kept her wand out and her eyes moving. Harry stopped in front of a stone bust perched on top of a cabinet, wearing a tarnished tiara that looked, to the uninitiated, like theatrical costume jewelry. But it made her skin prickle the moment she focused on it, the specific magical wrongness of dark magic that had been old for a long time and had settled into permanence. Harry looked at it. The tiara looked back in the way that objects that had been corrupted for centuries looked back, without eyes, but with something. "Don't touch it," Minerva said. "I know," Harry said. He was examining it from about a foot away, and the expression he wore was the particular frowning focus of someone solving a problem they find interesting despite the context. "The fragment's resonance is different from the ones in me. It's isolated, no network anchor, just a standalone Horcrux. It should be easier to destroy." "Easier doesn't mean safe," Minerva said. "No," Harry said. "It doesn't." He looked at her. "We need Phileas for the containment and Poppy for the post-destruction diagnostic. And Moody should be present for the actual destruction in case it reacts." "Some Horcruxes do react," Minerva said. "When destroyed." "Dumbledore's notes mentioned it," Harry said. He studied the diadem for another moment. "It knows we're here," he said. "How?" "It shifted," Harry said. "The resonance frequency just changed. It's not the object, it's the fragment inside it. It can detect." He stopped. Tilted his head. "It can detect the fragments in me. We're resonating. We're close enough in origin that it can feel mine." Minerva looked at him sharply. "Is that dangerous?" "I don't think so," Harry said. He didn't look frightened. He looked like someone who has found a significant data point. "But it means Voldemort might also be able to detect it. If his fragments can resonate with each other across distance." He paused. "We should move faster." He looked at the diadem one more time with those still, bright eyes. "Tomorrow," he said. "We deal with this one tomorrow. And the ring as soon as we can after. The cave one and the Gringotts one will take more work." He turned away from the diadem with the decisive movement of someone closing a chapter. "We should talk to Amelia about the vault. Gringotts requires legal access or a very compelling argument. Or a goblin who owes me a favor," Minerva said. Harry looked at her. "I helped a goblin out of a very complicated situation in 1981, she said. "I have not called the favor in. It may be time." Harry's mouth curved. "You have a goblin contact." "I have many contacts," Minerva said, with the mild dignity of someone who has spent 50 years being useful to a wide variety of people. Harry looked satisfied. He took one more glance back at the diadem, the tarnished tiara on the stone bust in the vast strange room, and then turned and walked back through the debris with the same focused confidence he'd walked in with. Behind them, Minerva thought she heard a sound from the direction of the diadem, not a voice, not mechanical, more like the sound of a frequency that had been alone for a long time encountering something it recognized. She didn't mention it to Harry. But she walked a little faster. The legal movement happened on a Friday, 3 days after the Dumbledore meeting. Amelia Bones filed the emergency trial review for Sirius Black at 9 in the morning on the grounds of procedural failure. No formal hearing, no veritaserum examination, no opportunity for defense, and by noon the story had moved through the ministry like a stone thrown into still water, the ripples reaching every office simultaneously. The Wisengamot chair sent a formal inquiry to Amelia's office. The minister sent 3 owls in 4 hours. 2 of Dumbledore's closest ministry allies sent careful, worried notes to Dumbledore that he did not share with Minerva but that Moody, through means Minerva chose not to examine too closely, obtained and summarized as panicking, nothing organized yet. Sirius's solicitor, a sharp, methodical woman named Andromeda Tonks, who happened to be Sirius's cousin and who had been waiting for this moment with a focused patience that made Minerva feel a specific professional kinship, filed the formal habeas petition within the hour. Harry was in the hospital wing for his 7th extraction when the news arrived. He was midway through the process. Poppy had reached a blood anchor fragment, which was more sustained than the neural thread work, and he was doing the controlled breathing and the focused middle-distance stare and the pressing of both hands flat on the table, when Minerva came in and held up the note from Amelia. He read it in 3 seconds while Poppy and Sirius continued the extraction. "Good," he said, and went back to the controlled breathing. Sirius looked at Minerva over Harry's head with an expression that roughly translated as "I have given up trying to contextualize this child and am simply documenting events." The blood anchor fragment came free 20 minutes later. The containment sphere went dark around it. Harry sat up, breathed out, and said, "How many is that?" 7 out, Poppy said, running the diagnostic. 12 remaining. Output increase from baseline is now 46%. Core fragments next, Harry said. "We've discussed the timing." "I know the timing," Harry said. "I mean next in sequence. After the adjustment period." He looked at the containment sphere. At the 7 dark points inside the 7 sealed glass spheres arranged on the shelf Sirius had installed. 7 pieces of something that had been in him since before he could remember, now outside of him, sealed and permanent and done. "When Sirius is out," Harry said, "I want him here for the core extractions." Poppy looked at him. "Medically there's no reason." "I know there's no medical reason," Harry said. "I want him here." He paused. "For the same reason Professor McGonagall is always in the chair." The room was quiet. Poppy looked at Minerva. Minerva looked at the 7 dark spheres. "He'll be out before the core extractions," Minerva said. "I'll make sure of it." Harry nodded and slid off the table. He looked at the spheres for a moment longer, and in the look there was something that wasn't exactly peace but was moving in that direction, the specific quality of someone who has been slowly returning to themselves and can feel the distance shortening. He turned to Sirius. "The variable cycle protocol worked well today," he said. "But the blood anchor has a different resistance pattern from the neural threads. I want to adjust the modulation for the cardiac fragments. I think we're still using too much frequency for too long at the apex." Sirius already had his notebook out. "Show me," he said. Harry took the pencil from behind his ear. Minerva watched them, the tiny professor and the small boy with the wild hair and the notebook, standing in the golden light of the hospital wing with the 7 sealed spheres on the shelf behind them, and she thought about Dumbledore walking out of her study 3 days ago and the 12 words Harry had said in the middle of the argument that had ended it. "I am not the mechanism. I'm the person." And the mechanism, piece by piece, was coming out of him. And what was left was entirely, undeniably, remarkably his. Chapter 5, The Hunt. Sirius Black walked out of Azkaban on a Wednesday morning 11 days after Andromeda filed the petition, which was, by any measure of ministry bureaucratic speed, essentially instantaneous, a testament to the quality of the evidence, the forcefulness of Amelia Bones, and the fact that 3 Wizengamot members who had initially been inclined toward delay had received personal visits from Alastair Moody carrying documentation and a specific expression that communicated. Without words, that delay was inadvisable. The emergency tribunal had lasted 4 hours. Pettigrew's name was on record now, the Animagus registration, the faked death, the switching of secret keeper that Dumbledore had confirmed under oath in precisely the honest testimony he'd promised. The Wizengamot had deliberated for 40 minutes. The verdict was unanimous. Sirius walked out into grey morning air wearing the clothes Andromeda had brought him, clean, properly fitting, his own size, and he stopped on the steps of the ministry building where the final paperwork had been completed, and he stood there for a moment doing nothing except breathing air that didn't smell of Azkaban. Harry was at the bottom of the steps. He'd insisted on coming. Minerva had not argued because she had learned, over the past 3 weeks, that there were arguments worth having with Harry and arguments that simply revealed the quality of his reasoning, and this had been firmly the second kind. He was standing with both hands in the pockets of the dark coat, watching Sirius with the steady, clear-eyed attention he brought to everything that mattered. Sirius came down the steps. He looked better than he had in the cell, clean, upright, less hollow, and he looked worse, in a specific way, because being outside and clean and upright meant there was nothing between him and the full weight of everything he was carrying. In Azkaban you survived by not feeling. Out here, Feeling was available again, and it showed. He stopped in front of Harry. Harry looked up at him. "Okay?" Harry said. Sirius made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that was absolutely not going to be anything else. "Working on it," he said. "That's fine," Harry said. "You've got time." Sirius crouched down so they were roughly eye level, which put him on the ministry steps in a crouch in front of a 5-year-old while Andromeda Tonks watched from the side with the expression of someone witnessing something they would remember for a long time. He looked at Harry, at Lily's eyes and James's hair and the dark coat and the sellotape-free glasses, and something in his face was doing the long, difficult work of coming back from somewhere very far away. "You got me out," Sirius said. "Professor McGonagall got you out," Harry said. "And Amelia Bones. And Andromeda. He considered. "I accelerated the timeline." "How?" "I told Professor McGonagall to stop being patient," Harry said. Sirius looked at Minerva, who was standing at the base of the steps with her arms folded. She raised an eyebrow. "He did say that," she confirmed. Sirius looked back at Harry. "James used to say the same thing to her," he said. "Constantly." "Did it work for him?" "About 40% of the time." Sirius stood. Looked around at the grey London morning, grey sky, grey buildings, people moving on the pavement with the focused indifference of city crowds who had decided that a man standing on ministry steps having a visible emotional experience was not their concern. He breathed it in. "Where are we going?" "Hogwarts," Minerva said. "You need rest and proper food and the hospital wing, in that order, and then we have work." "What work?" Harry pulled the folder from his bag, the Horcrux project folder, clear-faced and precisely labeled, and held it out to Sirius. Sirius took it. Opened it. "Read the outstanding list." "The Gringotts Vault," he said. "We need a legal entry argument," Harry said. "Or your goblin contact, Professor." "Ragnarok owes me the favor," Minerva said. "But the favor covers access, not authority to destroy the contents." "We have authority," Sirius said. He was still looking at the list with the focused sharpness that Azkaban had dulled but not removed. "The Lestrange Vault, Bellatrix is in Azkaban, Rodolphus II, Rabaston fled the country. The vault's assets are technically in Ministry frozen status pending, I know the statute. Amelia can authorize a restricted access review of the vault contents on dark artifact grounds." He looked at Minerva. "She's already opened the investigation. Dark artifact review within an open investigation is standard practice." "You know the statute," Minerva said. "I had 4 years and no books," Sirius said. "I went through every piece of law I'd ever memorized." A pause. "Also I used to run from the law quite a lot, so I made it my business to know the exact boundaries." He handed the folder back to Harry. "Get Amelia to authorize the vault access on dark artifact review grounds. I'll talk to Ragnarok with Minerva. The goblins will cooperate with a legal access order and a personal request from a creditor. I've got some Gringotts creditor standing from the Black Estate." Harry looked at him. "You worked that out from a 3-item list in under 2 minutes." "Yes," Sirius said. Harry nodded with quiet satisfaction. "Good," he said. "I thought you'd be useful." Sirius looked at him for a moment. Then he said, to Minerva, "He's terrifying." "Frequently," Minerva said. "I'm standing right here," Harry said. "I know," Sirius said. "That's why I said it." But his expression, looking at Harry, was not alarmed. It was the expression of someone discovering that something they'd been afraid of, the weight of grief, the impossible task of being a godfather to the child of people you'd lost, was actually, astonishingly, something he could do. Because the child in question had made it navigable by being entirely, straightforwardly himself. He put his hand on top of Harry's head briefly, not a ruffle, just a touch, warm and quick. Harry didn't pull away. They did the diadem first, the morning after Sirius arrived, because the diadem was already located and because Harry had been right about the resonance detection risk. In the days since he'd found it, he'd felt, twice, briefly, the external fragments in the room of hidden things pulsing against the fragments still inside him, a frequency call and partial response that made the hair on his arm stand up and left him certain that Voldemort, wherever he was, could feel it too. Moody had agreed. "Move fast," he'd said, in the manner of someone who had survived 40 years by treating urgency as a permanent state. The room of hidden things in the early morning was different from the afternoon, quieter, if that was possible, the accumulated centuries of hidden objects sitting in their own deep particular silence. They went in as 6, Harry, Minerva, Sirius, Moody, Phileas, and Poppy, which was everyone relevant to either the extraction work or the combat contingency, which Moody had insisted on including. Harry led them through the debris to the stone bust without hesitation. The diadem was where they'd left it, tarnished and cold on its perch, and the wrongness of it was more pronounced in the morning quiet, not threatening exactly, more like a sound just below the threshold of hearing that set the teeth on edge. Sirius looked at it for a moment. His jaw was tight. "Ravenclaw's diadem," he said. "I remember Dumbledore mentioning it once. Years ago. Said it was lost." "It's been here," Harry said. He was about 3 feet away, watching the diadem with the evaluating focus. "I can feel the fragment more clearly today. It's been resonating." He glanced at Phileas. "The containment first, the way we planned?" Phileas nodded and moved to position. He'd adapted a version of the extraction containment protocol for external Horcruxes, different from the in-body work, more like an isolation chamber that could be erected around the object and then collapsed inward, compressing the dark magic until it had nowhere to go except destruction. He'd spent 3 days on the theoretical framework and Harry had spent 2 of those 3 days working through the calculations alongside him until the methodology was clean. "The fragment will react when it detects the isolation field," Harry said. He was still watching the diadem. "It knows we're here. It knew last time." He paused. "Be ready for it to do something." "Horcruxes don't have," Poppy started. The diadem moved. Not much, a small shift, the tiara tilting on the bust with no wind and no vibration to explain it. But it moved, and the temperature in the immediate area dropped 3 degrees in about 2 seconds, and the quality of the wrongness went from passive to something with direction. "Now," Harry said. Phileas cast the isolation field. The reaction was immediate and violent, a pulse of dark magic that hit the isolation field and sheeted outward like black lightning, crackling against the walls of the containment and illuminating the piled debris in a harsh, cold light. Moody had his wand up before the pulse completed, and Sirius was right beside him, both of them tracking the field's integrity with the focused competence of people who had fought a war. The diadem rose off the bust. Inside the isolation field it lifted and spun slowly, and the dark magic around it intensified into something visible, a darkness that was darker than the surrounding air, the soul fragment making itself known, reacting to the threat of destruction with the only thing it had, which was the refusal of something that did not want to stop existing. Harry stepped forward. "Harry," Minerva started. "I need to be closer," he said. He said it calmly, without stopping. "The resonance between me and the fragment, I can use it as a guide frequency. It makes the compression more precise." He stopped about a foot from the isolation field's boundary. The dark magic inside pulsed toward him, responding to the fragments in his body, straining toward the resonance. He felt it like a pull, like magnetism, deeply unpleasant in the specific way of things that had been part of you and were now trying to reclaim the relationship. "Phileas," Harry said. "Start the compression. 15% initially." Phileas began the compression sequence. The isolation field tightened. The diadem spinning accelerated. "I'm going to give it a counter-frequency," Harry said, still entirely conversational. "To break the fragment's coherence before compression. It should make the destruction cleaner." You can't cast a counter-frequency from outside the field, Sirius said. Not as a spell, Harry said. He held out his hand toward the field. The light in his palm, the soft, steady light that had appeared the first time 3 weeks ago and had been getting stronger and more reliable since, came easily now, warm and clear, and he shaped it with a focused precision that Sirius watched with the expression of a man witnessing a new technique being invented in real time. It's direct magical output, not a formal casting. The field is permeable to non-directed magic. That's theoretically, Sirius stopped. That's theoretically correct, but I've never seen anyone. The light reached the isolation field and passed through it, and where it touched the dark magic inside, the darkness reacted, not by absorbing the light but by fracturing, the coherence of the soul fragment breaking up at the edges like ice under pressure. The diadem screamed. There was no other word for it. Not a sound that ears processed, a resonance event, felt in the bones and the chest and the back of the throat, the fragment expressing, in the only language available to it, the fact of its dissolution. It lasted 3 seconds, sharp and terrible. Then Sirius collapsed the field completely. The implosion was silent. A rush of cold air inward, a crack, and then nothing. The diadem fell to the floor, just metal now, the magical wrongness gone out of it entirely, an old tiara with some tarnish and a long history and no soul in it. Harry dropped his hand. The light went out. He was slightly pale. He breathed out once, carefully. That was loud, Sirius said, with the mild understatement of someone who had felt the resonance event in his back teeth. It knew it was dying, Harry said. He looked at the fallen diadem. How long until the soul fragment is fully dispersed? He asked Poppy. Poppy was already scanning. Dispersal is immediate upon coherence collapse, she said. It's gone. She looked at Harry. How are you? The internal fragments responded to that frequency. I know. He put his hand briefly to his sternum. They're settled. The external one's gone, so the resonance call has stopped. He looked at the diadem on the floor. Can I keep it? The object? Everyone looked at him. It's a 1,000-year-old relic, he said. The fragment's gone. It's just historical now. Minerva looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said. I don't see why not. He picked it up and turned it in his hands with the focused appreciation of someone who found old things interesting regardless of their recent history, and put it in his bag. Moody looked at Sirius. Sirius looked at Sirius. Sirius looked at the ceiling. He put a Horcrux in his bag, Sirius said. Former Horcrux, Harry said, from inside the bag, where he was fitting it carefully next to the mathematical notebook. Currently just a tiara. The Gringotts operation took a week to organize and 2 hours to execute. Amelia's authorization came through in 4 days, dark artifact review within an open investigation, exactly as Sirius had predicted, signed and sealed with the full weight of the DMLE behind it. Ragnarok, after a meeting with Minerva and Sirius that Harry was not present for but received a detailed debrief on, agreed to escort the authorized party to the Lestrange vault with the professional cooperation of someone honoring a debt and not enjoying it. Harry spent the week doing 2 more extractions, both cardiac resonance fragments, which were the most sustained work yet, and left him quiet and still for several hours afterward, sitting in Minerva's study with the star charts and the mathematical notebook in an expression that was not distress but was doing serious processing. The output readings after the 9th and 10th extractions had Poppy rerunning her diagnostic 3 times. 68%, she said, the 3rd time. Harry looked at the number. From suppressed baseline to 68 above baseline in 10 extractions, he said. The increase is accelerating, not plateauing. The core fragments are the primary suppressors, Poppy said. As we approach the 3 core extractions, the network is progressively losing coherence. The remaining fragments are anchoring less effectively. What happens to a network when the anchor points lose coherence? Harry asked. It becomes unstable, Sirius said. He'd been in the room doing his own calculations. The remaining fragments start to, he stopped. Made a face. They start to compensate. Over-anchor. Which makes them more noticeable but also more volatile. More volatile means the external Horcruxes will be reacting too, Harry said. If the network is partially coherent and unstable, he tapped the pencil on the notebook. Voldemort can feel the network. If it's destabilizing, he knows we're destroying it. He looked at Minerva. How fast can we move on the ring? After Gringotts, she said. The ring is the most dangerous item on the list. Dumbledore's note specifically, I know what the notes say, Harry said. The curse on the ring. I've been thinking about it. He turned to a page in the notebook covered in a different kind of calculation, less mathematical, more structural, the kind of analysis that looked at a magical problem as an engineering challenge. The ring has two separate magical elements, the Horcrux fragment and the killing curse trapped in the stone. They're distinct. The Horcrux methodology works on the fragment. The killing curse is a separate problem. Sirius leaned over. You've been working on the killing curse component. It's an active curse preservation in a physical matrix, Harry said. The stone is the matrix. The curse is stable inside it because the stone is preventing its natural dispersal. He showed Sirius the structural analysis. If you dissolve the matrix, you release the curse, Sirius said, alarmed. Unless you have a containment field ready that the curse disperses into rather than out, Harry said. Like the isolation field but inverted, not compressing the fragment inward, expanding a safe dispersal zone outward so the curse has somewhere to go that isn't us. Sirius looked at the calculation for a long time. The geometry on the dispersal zone, he murmured. Third page, Harry said. Sirius turned to the third page. Read it. His eyebrows did a complicated ascent. You've calculated the exact field radius for safe dispersal based on the stone's matrix density. To know the exact matrix density, Harry said. I've estimated from Dumbledore's description of the ring. But the principle holds and the margin of error in the radius calculation is large enough to accommodate the estimate. That margin of error is large because you made it large deliberately, Sirius said. I always build in margin, Harry said. Especially with killing curses. Sirius, who had been listening from the other side of the room, said, he sounds like an Auror. He sounds like a better Auror than most Aurors, Moody said, which, from Moody, was roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. Harry looked at neither of them and kept working on the calculations. The Lestrange vault was deep in Gringotts, 4th level, behind a security door that required 3 separate authentication steps and a goblin escort who walked slightly ahead of the group and communicated via expressions of professional neutrality that he had strong opinions about this situation and was choosing not to share them. Ragnarok had assigned the escort himself, a young goblin named Griphook who moved with the clipped efficiency of someone who found humans collectively baffling and individually manageable. The vault door was iron and cold and opened with a resonance that Harry felt in his chest from the remaining fragments, a distant call, the Horcrux inside sensing its network. He stopped at the threshold. There, he said, pointing immediately. The vault was enormous, gold and jewels and stacked treasures going back centuries, the accumulated wealth of a family that had been wealthy for a very long time and had not been particular about sources. In the back left corner, on a stone shelf, a golden cup with 2 handles and a badger engraving sat looking entirely ordinary and comprehensively wrong. Griphook looked at the cup. Looked at Harry. How did you? It's calling to me, Harry said, already moving into the vault. Don't touch anything else, Griphook said, very sharply. The flagranti and Gemino curses on the vault contents, I know, Harry said. He was navigating a careful path through the piled treasure with his hands held slightly out from his sides, not touching anything. He stopped in front of the cup. Looked at it. Same as the diadem? Sirius said, from the vault entrance. No, Harry said. Different. This one's older. The fragments more settled. He crouched slightly to look at it without touching. Less volatile. The isolation and compression will work here without the counterfrequency step. There's a flagrante curse on that shelf, Griphook said. I can see it, Harry said. He held out his hand and the soft light appeared in his palm, and he moved it slowly over the shelf surface. Where the light touched the flagrante enchantment, the curse's pattern was briefly visible, a web of heat trigger lines across the shelf surface, complex but mappable. Harry traced it carefully with the light, reading it. There's a clear path in the middle, he said. About 6 inches wide. Not cursed. Goblins know their own security systems, Griphook said, with the precise tone of someone both confirming and being annoyed that the confirmation was necessary. Then you agree, Harry said. Griphook made a sound. Harry reached into the 6-inch clear path on the shelf, picked up the cup by the handle on the right side, and stood up. Everyone in the vault entrance collectively held their breath. The cup was in his hand. The shelf had not triggered. He'd read the curse correctly. He turned around. The cup was doing the thing in his hand, the resonance, the fragment reaching toward the remaining fragments in him like something that recognized kin. He held it with a steady grip and walked back to the vault entrance and held it out to Phileas. Phileas, who had the portable isolation field generator prepared, a modification he'd built based on the Room of Hidden Things work, took the cup with both hands and placed it immediately into the field. The fragment reacted. More contained than the diadem, more settled in its anchoring, but the resistance was strong and sustained, a deep cold that made Griphook take 2 sharp steps backward and Sirius reach for his wand. Standard compression, Harry said, standing beside Phileas. You don't need me for this one. Phileas looked at him. Are you sure? The fragment's not volatile enough to need the counterfrequency. The isolation field is sufficient. Harry watched the cup with his head slightly tilted, reading the resonance. Go. Phileas began the compression. The cup's fragment resisted with the solid, deep resistance of something old and settled, and the temperature in the vault dropped sharply, and the gold in the piles around them rang briefly like struck bells. Then the compression reached the critical point and the coherence broke and the cold went out of the air all at once like a door slamming. The cup was just a cup. Phileas looked at his readings. Fragment destroyed, he said. Harry already had the Horcrux project folder out. Resolved sighed, the diadem, the cup, and the 7 extracted fragments. He added the cup. Sirius counted. 9 down, he said. 10 if you include the diary Dumbledore already dealt with. I don't count the diary, Harry said. I wasn't there for it. He looked at the folder. Outstanding, the ring, the locket, the snake, and the 9 remaining ones in me. He looked up. The ring next. Then the locket. The locket's location is still uncertain, Minerva said. Mundungus Fletcher, I know where Fletcher drinks, Moody said. Leave Fletcher to me. Everyone looked at him. There are advantages, Moody said, to being alarming. The ring was in Little Hangleton, in the ruins of the Gaunt family house, which was a collapsed structure in an overgrown field that had clearly decided it was going to return to the earth and was making good progress. The November cold was significant here, different from Azkaban cold, just weather, but sharp and cutting, the kind that found gaps in coats and occupied them. Harry walked the perimeter of the ruins before going in. He was doing the thing he'd been doing since the diadem, the slow circuit, hands slightly out, reading the magical landscape the way Phileas read frequency signatures. 3 weeks ago he couldn't have done this. The extractions had cleared channels that hadn't been opened since he was a year old, and what was coming through those channels was developing the specificity and range of a sense coming online properly for the first time. Moody walked beside him. The others held the perimeter, Sirius at the north, Minerva at the east, Phileas at the south with his equipment. The curse, Harry said, on his second circuit. Yes, Moody said. It's in a secondary layer, Harry said. Not at the ring. At the entry point. There's a ward around the ruins that triggers the killing curse trap if someone crosses it with hostile intent. Moody's magical eye rotated. I can see the ward. It's old. Couldn't parse the trigger condition from here. Intent-based, Harry said. Like the room of hidden things. It reads intent. He stopped. Looked at the ruins. I can go in. Explain, Moody said. I'm not coming in to take the ring with hostile intent toward Voldemort's Horcrux, Harry said. I'm coming in to remove a fragment of dark magic from an object so I can put it with the others. Different intention. Intent-based wards are not that precise, Moody said. They read broad states, not specifics. This one is that precise, Harry said. Feel the ward. It's Voldemort's own work. He was more careful than average. He looked at Moody. The ward responds to the intent to destroy the Horcrux specifically. It can't detect intent to remove the fragment. That's a different action from destruction. Destruction is violent. Removal is clinical, Moody said slowly. Clinical, Harry confirmed. I've been trained in extraction methodology. I know the difference at the level of intent because Poppy taught it to me. The ward won't feel destruction because that's not what I'm intending. He paused. Probably. Probably, Moody repeated, with the expression of a man reviewing his life choices. 80%, Harry said. You're calculating the odds of not dying from a killing curse trap. I'd rather know the odds than not know them. Moody looked at him for a long time with both eyes. You have the dispersal field geometry, he said finally. Sirius has the field ready, Harry said. From the outside. If the ward triggers, the dispersal field deploys and the curse goes outward into the safe zone instead of through you. Right. Harry looked at the ruins. The ring is in the floor. Under the boards in the northeast corner. I can feel it from here. He glanced at Moody. I'm going in. Moody said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then he turned and made a signal to Sirius, sharp, precise, the hand signal that meant deploy on my mark. Then he said, I'm coming with you. You don't have the same intent state, then I'll manage my intent very carefully, Moody said. Move. They went in together. The ward hit Harry the moment he crossed the threshold, not as a trigger, as a test, a sensation like eyes opening and examining him, reading the intent behind the entry. He held the extraction intention steady in his mind with the same focused clarity he used during Poppy's work. This is clinical removal, this is fragment extraction, this is what I do, and the ward examined it and found it technically accurate and let him pass. Moody crossed a half-second later. His jaw was set. The ruins were debris and old stone and the smell of something that had been rotting for a long time and had given up on it. Harry walked the northeast corner, found the floorboard, half collapsed, the wood soft with age, and felt the ring beneath it without needing to look. He looked anyway. He'd been careful about looking ever since the vault. The board came up with minimal effort. The ring was on a piece of rotten cloth, a dark band with a large stone, cracked down the middle, the crack old but the curse preserved in it the way Dumbledore's notes had described. Active. Waiting. The Horcrux fragment was clearly detectable, resonating deeply. And the killing curse inside the stone was a specific kind of wrongness, concentrated, deliberate, preserved like something in amber. Sirius, Harry said. From outside, Sirius's voice, ready. Harry held out his hand. The soft light came, and this time he shaped it with careful precision, not the counter-frequency technique he'd used for the diadem, something more specific, a layered output that formed the safe dispersal geometry from the inside out, his own magic creating the conditions for the curse's safe release in the moment the stone matrix was dissolved. You're creating the dispersal field from the inside, Moody said. He did not sound alarmed, exactly. He sounded like a man updating a professional database at speed. Sirius's field from outside, mine from inside, Harry said. Double layer. The curse can't find a path that isn't contained. He checked the geometry once. The light was holding the shape steadily, the dispersal cone extending upward and outward from the ring in the precise radius he'd calculated. Now. He reached down and touched the ring. The ward went off. The killing curse released from the stone in a column of green that went straight up into Harry's dispersal cone and hit Phileas's field from outside simultaneously, and the two layers caught it between them, and the curse spun in the containment for a fraction of a second, found no exit, and dispersed. Gone. The ruins briefly illuminated sickly green and then dark again. The Horcrux fragment, with the stone matrix dissolved, was exposed and unstable. Harry was already working on it, the extraction technique, the counter-frequency light modulation, and the fragment came free in under 30 seconds, the fastest external extraction yet, because the matrix destruction had destabilized the anchoring entirely. He caught the fragment in a separate containment sphere he'd been carrying in his pocket, prepared in advance by Phileas, sized for a single fragment. The ring dropped to the floor. Just a ring. He picked it up. Looked at the cracked stone. Moody let out a long breath beside him. "You know what that stone is," he said. Harry looked at it more closely. At the symbol engraved faintly under the crack. 3 marks, a triangle, a circle, a line. "The Deathly Hallows symbol," he said. "The Resurrection Stone," Moody said. "One of 3. Harry looked at the ring in his hand. At the crack in the stone where the killing curse had been preserved. At the Hallows symbol. He turned it over once, thoughtfully. Then he put it in his bag, next to the diadem. Moody watched him do it. "You're collecting them," he said. "Former Horcrux and a historically significant magical artifact," Harry said. "The fragment's gone. The object is just an object." He stood. "Can we go? It's cold." Moody looked at him. Looked at the bag. Looked at the ruins. "Do you know what the Deathly Hallows are?" 3 objects that supposedly give their master power over death, Harry said. "The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Cloak of Invisibility. Fairy tale of questionable origin that turns out to involve real objects." He paused. "Why? Do you know where the cloak is?" Moody was quiet for a beat. "Dumbledore has it," he said. "Has had it since your father died. He told James he was doing research with it." Harry considered this as they walked out of the ruins into the November grey where Minerva and Sirius and Phileas were waiting with various expressions on a spectrum from relief to barely contained anxiety. "Right," Harry said. "We'll deal with that later. Fletcher first, then the locket, then the snake." He held up the containment sphere for Phileas, who took it with both hands. Sirius looked at Harry. At the ruins. At the fact that Harry was walking toward them with his bag over one shoulder and his hands in his pockets, and the specific expression of someone who has just completed a task efficiently and is thinking about the next one. "What happened in there?" Sirius said. "Ward triggered," Harry said. "Killing curse. We contained it." Sirius went slightly pale. "You triggered, we contained it," Harry said. "Ring fragments destroyed. The stone is the Resurrection Stone, by the way. One of the Deathly Hallows. Did you know about those?" Sirius's expression was doing several things. Yes, actually. There's a story in a book, The Tales of Beetle the Bard," Harry said. "I've read it. The Hallows story. Professor McGonagall had it." He looked at Minerva. "My father had the cloak. Dumbledore's been holding it since he died." Minerva looked at him. Then at Moody. Moody gave a short nod confirming this. "The cloak is ours," Harry said. "Not aggressive. Just matter of fact. I'll want it back." "Yes," Minerva said. "You'll have it." Harry nodded, pulled the folder out, added the ring fragment to the resolved side. Outstanding, he said, locket, snake, 9 internal. 3 core. In that order. He looked up. Moody, we need Fletcher. Moody found Mundungus Fletcher in a pub in Knockturn Alley that afternoon, which involved Moody being alarming in the specific way he'd mentioned, and Mundungus producing the locket from under his coat with the haste of a man who had suddenly decided that possessing it was more trouble than it was worth. The fact that Mundungus had stolen it from the original hiding place rather than Grimmauld Place, where it had apparently resided briefly, was a complication that resolved itself in the face of Moody's sustained presence and magical eye. Moody came back with the locket at 6 in the evening and put it on Minerva's table, and everyone looked at it. It was heavy gold, ornate, with a serpentine S on the front. Harry looked at it from across the table. It's angrier than the others, he said. Angrier, Sirius said. The fragment. The resonance is active. Like it's been sitting there building pressure. He tilted his head. Dumbledore's notes said something about a fake locket being found in the original hiding place. Someone got there before us, before Dumbledore, even. Took the real one and left a decoy. Who? Minerva said. Harry looked at the locket. Someone who also wanted to destroy it, he said. Or use it. The note in Dumbledore's documentation, R.A.B. Do you know who that is? Silence. Then Sirius made a sound. He'd gone very still. R.A.B., he said. Regulus Arcturus Black. He looked at the locket. At the serpentine S, my brother, he said quietly. Regulus. The kitchen was very still. He died in 1979, Sirius said. Officially went back to Voldemort and was killed. That's what everyone was told. He looked at the locket. He tried to destroy it. He got to the hiding place before anyone. He took the real one. Something moved across his face, complex, old grief meeting new information. He tried. He didn't finish, Harry said, gently. No, Sirius said. But he tried. Harry looked at the locket for a moment. Then he looked at Sirius with the steady, clear directness that was simply his native mode of being. He got it this far, Harry said. We'll finish it. Sirius looked at him. Swallowed once. Nodded. The locket destruction took the combined effort of Harry's counter-frequency technique and Filius's isolation field at maximum compression and Moody actively suppressing 3 separate attempts by the fragment to destabilize the isolation field boundary. Because Harry had been right, it was angry, pressure-built, the most volatile external fragment yet, and when it finally broke the sound was longer and sharper than the diadem had been. When it was done, Harry added it to the folder without ceremony. Then he looked at the outstanding side. Nagini. 9 internal fragments. 3 core. The snake, he said. We don't know where Voldemort is. We don't need to find the snake yet, Minerva said. The snake stays near Voldemort. We deal with Voldemort, we deal with the snake at the same time. And Voldemort resurfaces when the network destabilizes enough that he can't ignore it anymore, Harry said. He paused. Which is going to be soon. How soon? Moody said. Harry pressed his hand briefly to his sternum. The 9 remaining fragments, the 3 core ones deepest of all. The network, losing coherence extraction by extraction, sending its distress signal out into wherever Voldemort's diminished spirit existed. I can feel him, Harry said. It was the first time he'd said it. Just plainly, the way he said everything. Not clearly. Like something at the edge of vision. But he's there. And he paused. He's moving. Looking for something. A body, Moody said. Yes, Harry said. He'll try for a body. He needs a host or enough power to create a form. He looked at the folder. We have time. But not a lot. He looked at Sirius. Core extractions tomorrow. Sirius looked at him steadily. I'll be there. I know, Harry said. He picked up the folder, added the locket, and put it in his bag next to the diadem and the ring. Good night, he said, to the room, with the easy practicality of someone who knows when a day's work is done, and went down the corridor to the guest room. The door closed. Sirius looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Minerva. When he said he could feel Voldemort, he said quietly. That's the network. The remaining fragments. Yes, Minerva said. And when the core fragments are removed, the network collapses, she said. He won't be able to feel Voldemort anymore. And Voldemort won't be able to feel him. Good, Sirius said. He looked at the door. At the corridor. At the place where a 5-year-old had said goodnight and walked off with 3 former Horcruxes in his school bag like they were library books. He's all right, Sirius said. Not a question, a checking, out loud, of something he needed to confirm. He's more than all right, Minerva said. He's the most extraordinary person I've ever taught. And I've been teaching for 50 years. Sirius looked at her. You haven't technically started teaching him yet. No, Minerva said. But I intend to. She paused. Starting with transfiguration. I have a feeling about his transfiguration. Sirius picked up his tea. Outside the Hogwarts windows, the November night was clear for once, actual stars visible over the loch, the cold making everything sharp and bright and close. Lily would be, he started. I know, Minerva said. And James would be absolutely insufferable about it, Sirius said. He'd be so smug. He'd never let anyone forget. Insufferably so, Minerva agreed. 4 decades. Sirius smiled. It was a real smile, unguarded, genuine, the first one Minerva had seen that reached all the way to his eyes since Azkaban. It only lasted a moment. But it was there. He looked at the stars over the loch and drank his tea, and Minerva went back to the case files, and down the corridor a light was on under a door and a small voice was reading mathematics aloud to itself in the dark. The network had 3 anchors left. Tomorrow, they came out. Chapter 6, Chosen. The core extractions were scheduled for 9 in the morning and Harry was in the hospital wing at 8:15. Sitting on the examination table reading Phileas's updated variable cycle frequency paper with a pencil behind his ear and a cup of tea cooling beside him, which Minerva had brought and which he'd thanked her for with the automatic politeness that was slowly, incrementally, becoming something less automatic and more genuine. Sirius arrived at 8:40 with the look of someone who had slept badly, not from anxiety exactly but from the specific alertness of a person whose nervous system had spent 4 years in Azkaban and was still recalibrating to the concept of things being allowed to go well. He sat in the chair Minerva had always occupied. Harry looked up from the paper, looked at the chair, looked at Sirius, and said nothing. Just went back to reading. But the set of his shoulders changed slightly. Something released, very small, barely perceptible, the way a breath releases when you didn't know you were holding it. Poppy arrived at 5 to 9 with her instruments already prepared. Phileas came through the door at exactly 9 with his wand angled precisely and his notebook in his other hand and the expression of a man who had reviewed the calculations 4 times since last night and found them solid and was choosing to feel good about that rather than nervous. Moody took his position by the door. Minerva sat in the secondary chair, not the chair beside the table, that was Sirius's now, but close enough. Poppy ran the pre-extraction diagnostic. The golden script scrolled. She read it and made notes with the careful efficiency of someone who understood the data and respected what it represented. 3 core fragments, she said. They are, she paused, looking at the readings. They're aware of each other in a way the peripheral fragments weren't. The network is trying to consolidate. The remaining 9 fragments are reinforcing each other. She looked at Harry over the top of her diagnostic wand. The extraction sequence for the core anchors will need to be faster than our previous work. If we take too long between the 3, the remaining fragments will attempt to re-anchor. Then we do all 3 today, Harry said. Medically I know it's more than we've done in a single session, Harry said. But the re-anchoring risk changes the calculation. All 3 today. He looked at Poppy steadily. I can do it. Poppy looked at him. She had the expression she wore when she was running 2 assessments simultaneously, the professional one and the one that was simply about Harry, which had been developing over the past 3 weeks into something that had protective instincts in it. Between the second and third extraction, she said, we take a 20-minute break. Non-negotiable. Fine, Harry said. And you tell me immediately if something feels wrong. Not after. Immediately. Yes, Harry said, and meant it, because he and Poppy had developed the specific working understanding of 2 people who had done difficult things together enough times to trust each other's assessments. Poppy looked at Sirius. The variable cycle protocol for the core anchors, revised this morning, Sirius said. Based on Harry's frequency paper from last night. He showed her the updated calculations. She read them. Made one small note. Handed them back. They had the efficient shorthand of a collaboration that had been working well. Harry put down the paper and the pencil. He rolled his shoulders once, a preparatory movement, private and practical. He put his hands flat on his thighs. He looked at Sirius. Sirius looked back. Gray eyes, steady, present. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Harry nodded once, slightly. Ready, he said. The first core fragment was nothing like the peripheral work. Minerva understood this abstractly from Poppy's earlier descriptions, but abstract understanding and witnessing were different things, and she sat in the secondary chair and witnessed it with the focused, quiet attention of someone who refuses to look away from difficult things because looking away is a kind of abandonment. The fragment was deep. 3 layers into his magical core, anchored with the integration of nearly 4 years, and the detuning worked. Sirius's variable cycle protocol was clean and precise and Harry's counter-frequency light was steady, but deep meant sustained, and sustained meant Harry was in that state of extreme concentrated effort for 12 minutes straight without relief. He made no sound for the first 8 minutes. At 9 minutes his breathing changed, a controlled, deliberate shift that was the sound of someone managing intensity at the extreme end of what management could cover. Sirius's hands were gripping the arms of the chair. At 11 minutes the fragment began to move. Poppy tracked it with precise, small wand movements, guiding without forcing, and Harry held the counter-frequency steady with an effort that was visible in his jaw and his hands, and the way the light in his palm was slightly brighter than normal, slightly less stable at the edges, the magic responding to the demand being placed on it. At 12 minutes and 20 seconds, the fragment came free. The implosion of cold was sharp and total. Every instrument in the hospital wing rang at once, a clear, resonant chord that lasted about 2 seconds and then stopped. The healing lamps doubled in brightness and held there for a moment before settling. Harry dropped his hand. The light went out. He sat very still for about 4 seconds. His eyes were closed. Then he opened them. Poppy was already running the post-extraction diagnostic. She read it and her expression did something very controlled. Output increase from pre-session baseline, she said, carefully, is currently 89%. Nobody said anything. That's from 1 core fragment, Sirius said. Yes, Poppy said. Harry looked at his hands. Turned them over once, slowly, the way he did when he was reading his own magical state. He had the expression of someone listening to something only they can hear, not absent, intensely present, taking in the quality of the change. The network just, he paused. Something shifted. In the network. The remaining 6 peripheral fragments lost coherence for a moment. He looked at Poppy. Did you feel it? The instruments registered it, Poppy said. A network instability spike at the moment of extraction. Yes. She made a note. Harry, she said. I know, he said. 20-minute break after the second. We keep going. He looked steady. Not tired, not pushed past capacity, reading as honest about his own state, which she trusted, because he always had been. How long between first and second? 15 minutes, Poppy said. Drink this. She handed him a strengthening solution, pale gold in a small glass. Harry took it, examined the color briefly, the habit of someone who had Poppy's methodology memorized and cross-referenced it with his reading, and drank it. Put the glass down. Picked up the paper and pencil, found the page he'd been on, and read for 12 minutes with the focused absorption of someone who processes difficulty by returning to work. On the 13th minute, he put the pencil down, put the paper aside, and said, "Ready." The second core fragment was faster and harder simultaneously. Faster because the first extraction had weakened the anchoring. Sirius had been right about the network destabilizing. The second fragment was less settled than the first, more reachable. Harder because Harry had already done 12 sustained minutes of extreme effort, and the second round demanded the same quality of concentration from a system that had been working hard. 7 minutes in, Sirius was out of his chair. He didn't interfere. He just stood closer, and when he got to arm's reach from the table he stopped, and Harry, eyes fixed on the middle distance point and jaw set and light blazing steadily in his palm, seemed to feel the proximity, and something in his face eased, not relaxed, not distracted, just slightly less alone in the effort. 9 minutes. The fragment moved. 11 minutes. Poppy guided it to the surface with the controlled precision of someone doing the most skilled work of their career. Sirius shifted the modulation at the exact right moment. The collaboration between them had become something genuinely remarkable over the past 3 weeks, a technical partnership that had developed its own rhythm. The second fragment came free at 11 minutes 40 seconds. The cold was sharper this time. The healing lamps went white for a moment, and every ward Moody had placed on the room sang briefly, not triggered, just resonating with the release of energy. The containment sphere sealed itself. Harry sat back. He looked exhausted in the specific way of deep magical effort, not physically broken, not distressed, simply the look of someone who has been working at the absolute edge of their capability and is taking honest stock. Poppy ran the diagnostic. She read it. She sat down. Which was unusual. Poppy? Minerva said. 134%, Poppy said. Above pre-session baseline. She looked at Harry. Above the suppressed baseline we started with over 3 weeks ago, the increase is, she stopped. I don't have a comparable figure in the literature. I'm going to have to create one. Harry looked at his hands again. The light came without his asking for it, just appeared, warm and steady and clear in his palm, and it was brighter than it had ever been, the quality of it different, sharper at the edge and warmer at the center, like something that had been filtered through gauze all its life had finally come through clean. He looked at it. At the light that was simply, entirely his, no static, no suppression, no fragments of someone else's darkness dulling the signal. He looked at it for a long moment with an expression that was not triumph and not relief and not any single thing that had a simple name. Then he looked up and found Sirius, who was standing 2 feet away with an expression that was absolutely not going to be described as anything except what it was. Harry said, "Still 2 more." "I know," Sirius said, roughly. "But we're nearly through." "I know," Sirius said. 20-minute break. Harry ate. Minerva had brought food, sensible food, things with substance, and drank another strengthening solution and read the frequency paper for the final time and asked Sirius 2 questions about the third extraction-specific anchoring pattern that Sirius answered in detail, and then Harry said, "All right," with the same voice he'd started the morning with. The third core fragment was the oldest. Embedded at 14 months old, the deepest anchor in the network, the first piece of the architecture Dumbledore had placed, and it had been there the longest, and it was the most settled, and it resonated differently from the others in a way Harry had noted from the first day Poppy had mapped the network. It resonated with his magical signature more completely than any other fragment because it had been there since before his magical signature had fully developed. It had grown with him. It had shaped him, slightly, the way a stone in a stream shapes the current. Harry knew all of this. He'd known it for weeks. He'd thought about it carefully and read everything available about it and had his own theory about what the third core extraction would feel like, and his theory was that it would feel like losing something. He'd told Minerva this 2 days ago. She'd looked at him and said, "The fragment is not yours. What's yours is underneath it and it is completely, unalterably yours and it has been there the whole time. The fragment is noise. You are the signal." He'd held that carefully since then. He held it now. "Ready," he said. Sirius began the modulation. The third fragment's resistance was different from the first two, not greater in intensity but different in quality, the kind of resistance that came from deep integration rather than strength, like trying to remove something that had learned to belong. The counter-frequency light in Harry's palm had to work in a more sustained modulation, not the sharp apex work of the previous two but a long, gradual detuning, separating the fragment from the magical signature that had grown around it over 4 years. 15 minutes. 18. Harry was completely still. Not the stillness of effort, the stillness of absolute concentrated presence, all of him in the work, nothing held back, not 1 ounce of reserve being protected for afterward because there was no afterward if the work wasn't done. Sirius was standing right beside the table now, not touching, just there. At 22 minutes, the fragment began to release. It was slow. Poppy worked with extraordinary care, guiding the separation with incremental movements that were less like extraction and more like convincing, each movement a patient, precise argument that the fragment did not belong here and could be released. Sirius's modulation shifted through 11 frequency variations in the final 3 minutes, adapting in real time to the fragment's resistance pattern, and Harry tracked every shift and matched it with the counter-frequency, the two of them in a technical dialogue that had no words because it didn't need them. At 25 minutes and 18 seconds, the third core fragment came free. What happened was not like the first two. There was no sharp implosion, no cold pulse, no ringing of instruments. There was a silence, a complete, absolute silence that lasted perhaps 2 full seconds, and then every healing lamp in the room blazed white gold simultaneously and held there, and the warmth that came off Harry in that moment was not metaphorical, it was measurable. Poppy said later that her diagnostic instruments registered a magical field output that she had no scale for. The containment sphere sealed itself. The lamps settled back to their normal gold. The silence released. Harry sat in the aftermath of 25 minutes of the most sustained magical effort he'd ever done, and the light in his palm had not gone out. He hadn't asked for it. He hadn't consciously produced it. It was simply there, present, warm, bright, his, and it stayed. He looked at it. Something moved through his face that was not any of the things he usually showed, not the focused assessment or the practical reasoning or the careful management of feeling. It was something younger and more open than all of that, something that had perhaps been waiting underneath the fragments and the static and the 4 years in the cupboard and all the rest of it. Just Harry. Looking at the light in his hand that was simply, completely, absolutely his. Poppy tried to speak. Found she couldn't. Looked at her diagnostic readings. "Harry," she said finally, in a voice that was professionally composed over something that was not. "The baseline I have from your first scan 3 weeks ago, the suppressed baseline. I need you to understand that I have no comparison for what I'm reading now." She looked at him. "The network is gone. There are no foreign frequencies in your magical signature. What's there is entirely yours." A pause. "And it is, considerable. That is the most precise word I can find." Harry looked at the light for another moment. Then he closed his hand, slowly, and it went out, and he looked up. Moody, by the door. Sirius, lowering his wand. Poppy, with her readings. Minerva, in the secondary chair with the expression she wore when she was allowing herself to feel something fully rather than managing it. And Sirius, right beside him, looking at him with those grey eyes that were no longer hollow, and on his face the expression of a man who has been given back something he thought was gone forever and is still not entirely sure what to do with the miracle of it. "All three," Harry said. "All three," Poppy confirmed. Harry let out a single long breath. He looked at the Horcrux project folder on the side table, where Minerva had set it out before the session. He reached over and opened it. Resolved side, the diary, the diadem, the cup, the ring, the locket, and the 7 peripheral fragments, the 2 cardiac fragments, and now the 3 core fragments. 19. All 19. He picked up the pencil and marked them all off, each one, working down the list carefully, and when he was done he looked at the page for a moment. Then he closed the folder. "Nagini," he said. "And Voldemort. They didn't have to find Voldemort. Voldemort found them." It was 3 days after the core extractions, and Harry had spent those 3 days in a state that was, by any external measure, completely normal. He'd eaten, slept, worked through increasingly advanced magical theory with Sirius, learned his first formal transfiguration from Minerva who had been right about her feeling about his transfiguration, and had 3 long conversations with Sirius about James that left them both quieter and steadier than before them. Internally, those 3 days were a continuous recalibration that he experienced the way he experienced everything, with attentive, focused presence, not fighting it, not dramatizing it, just letting the change settle into the space it now occupied. His magic was something different now. Not overwhelming, it didn't feel large to him, because it felt like his, and your own scale is always the natural one. But he noticed the ways it responded without being asked, the way the light appeared when he was calm, the way objects moved toward him when he needed them, the way he could feel the magical architecture of rooms and wards and enchantments, the way Sirius felt frequency signatures. It was not a performance and it was not a power he showed. It was just him, more fully present in his own capability than he had ever been, the static gone and the signal clear. On the evening of the 3rd day, he was in the library. Not Hogwarts's main library, a smaller one, a reading room off the 3rd floor corridor that Minerva had shown him because it was warm and quiet and had a window seat that looked out over the grounds, and he'd claimed it in the way he was slowly claiming things in this building, not aggressively, just with the quiet recognition of someone learning that spaces could be theirs. He was reading a paper on advanced magical resonance theory when he felt it. Not the network was gone. This was different. This was the presence he'd described to the others 3 weeks ago as something at the edge of vision. Except it wasn't at the edge anymore. He closed the paper. Stood. Looked at the window. The Hogwarts grounds were dark, November evening, the lock flat and still and catching the last grey light. And on the far side of the grounds, near the tree-line, something moved. Not physically. Magically. A displacement, a wrongness, the same frequency he'd learned to identify in Horcrux fragments but larger, not a fragment. A presence. He walked out of the reading room. He found Moody first, in the corridor, because Moody was always in corridors. "He's here," Harry said. Moody's magical eye snapped toward the window. "Where?" "Tree-line. East grounds." Harry was already moving. "He's found a host. I can feel it, the presence is too coherent for a non-corporeal spirit. He's got a body. Something temporary." He paused. "Quirrell." Moody looked at him sharply. "The defense professor. He's not here this year." "No," Moody said. "He traveled. Last summer. To wherever Voldemort was gathering strength." His magical eye was very still. "Quirinus Quirrell." Stammering, nervous Quirinus Quirrell, who was never actually nervous, it was a performance. "I never liked him." He'd already drawn his wand. "We need, everyone," Harry said, and then the wards sang. Not gently. The wards Moody had placed on Hogwarts in the weeks since this had started, comprehensive, paranoid, multi-layered, they didn't trigger, they sang, because something of significant dark magical power had just crossed the outer perimeter, and whatever had crossed it was not hiding. Voldemort, in whatever diminished form he currently occupied, was not approaching carefully. He was coming in the front. Which meant either he didn't fear them, or he was desperate enough that fear wasn't the primary calculation. Harry thought it was the second. The network was gone. Every Horcrux they'd held was gone. The architecture Dumbledore had spent 4 years building was dismantled entirely. And Voldemort had felt every piece of it go, had felt his own soul fragments destroyed one by one, had felt the network collapse, and now Nagini was the only Horcrux left, and he knew, because he was not stupid and had never been stupid, that they were coming for her too. Desperate men moved fast and without cover, and Harry understood this with the clear-eyed calm of someone who has thought about the endgame long enough to recognize it when it arrives. He moved toward the main entrance. Harry. Minerva's voice from the staircase, she'd felt the wards too, wand already drawn, Sirius 2 steps behind her coming down at speed. Main entrance, Harry said, not stopping. He's coming in directly. He needs the Philosopher's Stone, there's one here, in the school, Dumbledore brought it here for safekeeping. I read about it in the records. He glanced back at Minerva. He needs it to restore himself fully. That's what he's come for. The stone is in the 3rd floor corridor, Minerva said, keeping pace. Behind protections. Which he can get through eventually, Harry said. We don't let him get to it. We meet him here. Harry, he's already inside the outer wards, Harry said. He pushed open the main entrance doors. The grounds of Hogwarts at night were dark and cold and very large, and the figure walking across them from the tree-line was small at this distance but grew with each step, a young man, slim, moving with a strange doubled quality, like 2 wills occupying one body and neither comfortable with the arrangement. Quirrell stopped 20 feet from the entrance. His robes were travel-worn and his face was pale, and the expression on it was overlaid with something that wasn't him, something older and colder behind his eyes, using his face the way you use a mask. Harry Potter, Voldemort said. Quirrell's mouth moved, but the voice was not entirely his, thin and cold and resonant in the way of something that had existed for a long time in forms that didn't have voices and was currently using a borrowed one. I had hoped we might meet. Harry stood in the doorway of Hogwarts and looked at him. Moody was at his left shoulder. Sirius at his right. Minerva and Filius behind. The castle at his back. I know, Harry said. You've been feeling me for weeks. The fragments, Voldemort said. My work. Destroyed. Your work and Dumbledore's, Harry said. I've dismantled both. He looked at Quirrell's face and the thing behind it with the direct, steady attention he brought to everything. Professor Quirrell, he said, clearly addressing the host, I'm sorry for what's being done to you. I'm going to try to help you. Quirrell's expression flickered, a brief, confused human movement under the overlay. You cannot help him, Voldemort said. I think I can, Harry said. How long has he been hosting you? A pause. The cold of Voldemort's presence was distinct from the November air, specific, directed, the ambient chill of something fundamentally wrong about to do something. Harry felt it and stayed exactly where he was. Months, Voldemort said, with the faint contempt of someone who does not consider the vessel's experience worth calculating. Then his system is deteriorating, Harry said. He was addressing both of them simultaneously, the host and the parasite, each separately, keeping the distinction clear. Professor Quirrell, you have a choice in this. You don't have to keep holding him. He will die if I release, Voldemort started. He might, Harry said. But you're killing him anyway, slowly. He kept his eyes on Quirrell. You went looking for him, Harry said to the host, specifically. You went looking for him because you thought it would give you power. I understand that. I'm not judging it. But you can feel what it's actually doing to you. A pause. Hosts always can. Quirrell's face did something complicated and entirely human. Enough, Voldemort said, and the cold snapped outward, a directed pulse of dark magic, raw and forceful, not a wand cast but a projection of pure malevolent will, aimed at Harry. Harry's hand came up and the light came with it. Not the soft palm light. Something more directional, a warmth that went outward as much as the cold came inward, meeting the projection at the halfway point between them, and the two forces met in the 20 feet of Hogwarts grounds and the contact was visible, an interference pattern of gold and cold that flickered and resolved. The cold broke first. Voldemort, Quirrell, made a sound that was not from Quirrell. "You're different," Voldemort said. "Something has changed, everything has changed," Harry said. He stepped forward off the doorstep. Just one step, deliberate, onto Hogwarts grounds, and he could feel the castle's own magic at his back, the 1,000-year-old enchantments, the deep stone power of a place that had been protective for so long the protection had become structural. "You made Horcruxes so you wouldn't have to die," he said, still walking forward slowly. "I know why. I understand the fear behind it. But you've been dying anyway, piece by piece, for 5 years, and the pieces I had in me are gone, and the others are gone, and the one thing you have left is what's in front of you, a borrowed body and a borrowed voice and the Philosopher's Stone which you are not getting to." Voldemort sent another pulse. Larger this time, angrier, less directed, raw power from a diminished being that was making up in force what it lacked in precision. Harry didn't raise his hand this time. He pushed back, and the warmth went out in a wide, clean arc, and the pulse hit it and dispersed. Not dramatically. Not with an explosion of light and sound. It simply dispersed. The way a sound disperses in a large space, losing coherence, finding nothing to amplify it, going out into the air and becoming nothing. Voldemort was still for a moment. "You cannot destroy me," he said. "I have taken precautions." "I have, Nagini," Harry said. "Yes. I know." He kept walking forward, steady, deliberate. "Where is she?" A pause that answered the question. Nagini was here. Near Quirrell. The last Horcrux, the living anchor that Voldemort kept close, the vessel of the piece of himself he'd put away for safekeeping. Harry felt the snake before he saw her, the same dark wrongness as the other fragments, but warm-blooded, living, moving. She was in the grass to Quirrell's left, moving with the slow, cold-weather deliberateness of a large snake doing its best in November. He looked at her. "I have to separate the fragment from you," he said to the snake, which was not the sort of thing one said to a snake and expected results, except that in the weeks since the core extractions Harry had found that speaking intention clearly made a difference to his magic even when the audience wasn't human. He had no theory for why this was, just the more actions AI chawed a 2-minute read that could change how you use your membership Claude Sonnet 4.